Welcome to Crimes in the Dark, the channel where the most chilling crimes come to life in the dark. Before sleep catches up with you, like, subscribe, and tell me where you're listening to this story from. Now, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let yourself go. Because what you are about to hear is real. Case 1. In the heart of a small, seemingly peaceful college town in Pennsylvania, known as Atherton, stood a library that looked like something out of an ancient fairy tale. Its gray stone walls were covered with autumn vines, their orange and gold leaves dancing in the soft morning breeze. Within this sanctuary of knowledge, on the second floor, was the private office of Eleanor Ainsworth, the respected and somewhat eccentric head librarian. It was a small but charming room where every corner told a story. The bookshelves, filled with antique books with time-worn spines, seemed to whisper secrets of ages past. A brass desk lamp with its dim, yellowish light dimly illuminated the space, casting long shadows on the walls. And there, in front of a large window offering panoramic views of the campus, lay Eleanor's lifeless body. It was a cold October morning when the door to his office was opened by one of the library staff, who had noticed that the lights were still on from the night before. What he found inside took everyone's breath away. Eleanor was sitting in her chair behind the desk, her arms folded across it, as if she had fallen into a slump while reviewing some important document. Her face, unusually serene, seemed sculpted in marble, with an expression that revealed neither pain nor anguish. It was an image that chilled the blood, for there were no obvious signs of violence, no muffled screams, no desperate struggles, only silence. A silence so profound that it seemed to envelop everything, even the very soul of those who discovered the scene. It didn't take the first investigators to arrive long to realize that something was amiss. The half-empty teacup on the desk immediately caught their attention. Its contents, still warm, gave off a sweet smell that did not correspond to the usual aroma of the black tea Eleanor usually drank. Next to the cup, a rare book lay open face down on the table, as if someone had abruptly closed it in the middle of reading. Between its marked pages, a small rusty metal object glittered in the lamplight, out of place in the carefully ordered environment. It was an insignificant detail, but one that raised uncomfortable questions. Why was it there? Who had left it there? The answers were not yet clear, but the object seemed to stare at them, challenging them to find its meaning. The window, always open to allow the cool autumn breeze to enter the room, showed smudged fingerprints on its frame. They were barely visible, but suggestive enough to hint that someone might have used that way as a secret entrance or exit. Perhaps someone who knew Eleanor's habits well, and knew she preferred to work late in her office, away from the distractions of the day. On the desk, just where the center drawer was slightly ajar, a spot of fresh dust seemed out of place. It was as if someone had touched something that normally remained untouched, leaving behind a trail unnoticed by the untrained eye, but impossible to ignore for those seeking answers. The cause of death was initially a mystery. There were no visible injuries, no signs of asphyxiation, and no indication of a heart attack. But when toxicology tests revealed the presence of aconitine, a deadly poison known as wolf poison, the case took a dark and disturbing turn. This extremely rare and difficult to obtain compound was not something that just anyone could easily obtain. Its use suggested premeditation, a carefully crafted plan to eliminate Eleanor without a trace. The question echoing in everyone's mind was simple but devastating. Who could want to harm such a beloved and respected woman? In charge of the investigation was Detective Sarah Whitaker, a middle-aged woman whose reputation preceded her. With her brown hair always pulled back in a low ponytail and green eyes that seemed able to see beyond appearances, Sarah was known for her meticulousness and her ability to solve the most complex cases. She had come to Atherton from Philadelphia, where she had worked for years in the homicide division. Her experience had taught her that seemingly perfect crimes often had cracks in them, small mistakes made by the perpetrators that only someone with patience and acuity could detect. From the moment she set foot in Eleanor's office, Sarah knew this case would be different, not only because the victim was a central figure in the university community, but because the crime scene seemed designed to confuse, to hide the truth under layers of apparent normalcy. Welcome to Crimes in the Dark, the channel where the most chilling crimes come to life in the dark. Before sleep catches up with you, like, subscribe, and tell me where you're listening to this story from. Now, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let yourself go. because what you are about to hear is real. Case 1. In the heart of a small, seemingly peaceful college town in Pennsylvania, known as Atherton, stood a library that looked like something out of an ancient fairy tale. Its gray stone walls were covered with autumn vines, their orange and gold leaves dancing in the soft morning breeze. Within this sanctuary of knowledge, on the second floor, was the private office of Eleanor Ainsworth, the respected and somewhat eccentric head librarian. It was a small but charming room where every corner told a story. The bookshelves, filled with antique books with time-worn spines, seemed to whisper secrets of ages past. A brass desk lamp with its dim, yellowish light dimly illuminated the space, casting long shadows on the walls. And there, in front of a large window offering panoramic views of the campus, lay Eleanor's lifeless body. It was a cold October morning when the door to his office was opened by one of the library staff, who had noticed that the lights were still on from the night before. What he found inside took everyone's breath away. Eleanor was sitting in her chair behind the desk, her arms folded across it, as if she had fallen into a slump while reviewing some important document. Her face, unusually serene, seemed sculpted in marble, with an expression that revealed neither pain nor anguish. It was an image that chilled the blood, for there were no obvious signs of violence, no muffled screams, no desperate struggles, only silence. A silence so profound that it seemed to envelop everything, even the very soul of those who discovered the scene. It didn't take the first investigators to arrive long to realize that something was amiss. The half-empty teacup on the desk immediately caught their attention. Its contents, still warm, gave off a sweet smell that did not correspond to the usual aroma of the black tea Eleanor usually drank. Next to the cup, a rare book lay open face down on the table, as if someone had abruptly closed it in the middle of reading. Between its marked pages, a small rusty metal object glittered in the lamplight, out of place in the carefully ordered environment. It was an insignificant detail, but one that raised uncomfortable questions. Why was it there? Who had left it there? The answers were not yet clear, but the object seemed to stare at them, challenging them to find its meaning. The window, always open to allow the cool autumn breeze to enter the room, showed smudged fingerprints on its frame. They were barely visible, but suggestive enough to hint that someone might have used that way as a secret entrance or exit. Perhaps someone who knew Eleanor's habits well, and knew she preferred to work late in her office, away from the distractions of the day. On the desk, just where the center drawer was slightly ajar, a spot of fresh dust seemed out of place. It was as if someone had touched something that normally remained untouched, leaving behind a trail unnoticed by the untrained eye, but impossible to ignore for those seeking answers. The cause of death was initially a mystery. There were no visible injuries, no signs of asphyxiation, and no indication of a heart attack. But when toxicology tests revealed the presence of aconitine, a deadly poison known as wolf poison, the case took a dark and disturbing turn. This extremely rare and difficult-to-obtain compound was not something that just anyone could easily obtain. Its use suggested premeditation, a carefully crafted plan to eliminate Eleanor without a trace. The question echoing in everyone's mind was simple but devastating. Who could want to harm such a beloved and respected woman? In charge of the investigation was Detective Sarah Whitaker, a middle-aged woman whose reputation preceded her. With her brown hair always pulled back in a low ponytail and green eyes that seemed able to see beyond appearances, Sarah was known for her meticulousness and her ability to solve the most complex cases. She had come to Atherton from Philadelphia, where she had worked for years in the homicide division. Her experience had taught her that seemingly perfect crimes often had cracks in them, small mistakes made by the perpetrators that only someone with patience and acuity could detect. From the moment she set foot in Eleanor's office, Sarah knew this case would be different, not only because the victim was a central figure in the university community, but because the crime scene seemed designed to confuse, to hide the truth under layers of apparent normalcy. The relationship between Henry and Eleanor Ainsworth had always been strained, although both tried to conceal it in public. Eleanor, with her meticulous nature and strict adherence to rules, was often a critical voice within the university, especially when it came to ethical or financial issues. Over the past 5 years, she had accumulated evidence of financial irregularities committed by Henry, details that could ruin not only his career, but also the reputation of the entire institution. According to rumor, Eleanor planned to turn these compromising documents over to the university's board of trustees, a threat that Henry perceived as a sword of Damocles hanging over his head. The mere thought of these secrets coming to light terrified him, not only because of the professional consequences, but also because of the impact it would have on his personal and family life. When news of Eleanor's death reached Henry's ears, his initial reaction was one of surprise and concern, at least outwardly. He attended the memorial organized by the university and delivered a few emotional words about the importance of her contribution to the library and to academia. However, those watching closely noticed a strange gleam in his eyes, a mixture of relief and anxiety that he barely managed to conceal. It was inevitable that Detective Sarah Whitaker would include him on her list of persons of interest, given his connection to Eleanor and the rumors circulating about them. During questioning, Henry Caldwell was calm and cooperative, as if he knew exactly how to behave in front of the law. He explained that on the night of Eleanor's death, he had been at home with his wife, watching a romantic movie in their living room. He described the evening in detail, even mentioning the title of the movie and the snacks they had prepared. However, when Sarah asked him about his relationship with Eleanor, his tone changed subtly. He became more defensive, though he maintained a polite attitude. He denied any significant conflict with her, attributing past tensions to simple differences of opinion over the management of library funds. He insisted that Eleanor was a brilliant but stubborn woman, someone who was not always easy to work with, but that he would never have wished any ill will for her. What struck Sarah most during the interrogation was the lack of additional witnesses who could corroborate Henry's alibi. Only his wife could confirm that he had been home that night, which created a significant gap in his version of events. In addition, his attitude, though calculated and calm, had something stilted about it, as if he were reciting a rehearsed script. Sarah knew that culprits often revealed more than they intended through small gestures or inconsistencies in their stories, and Henry was no exception. His insistence on presenting himself as a blameless man, concerned only with the welfare of the university, seemed almost too perfect, as if he were trying to convince himself as much as others. Despite suspicions, there was no hard evidence directly linking Henry to Eleanor's murder. The detective knew she would need more than hearsay and speculation to incriminate him. But as she reviewed every detail of the case, Sarah couldn't help but feel that Henry Caldwell was keeping more secrets than he was willing to admit. And in a case as complex as this one, where appearances could be deceptive, the truth might be closer than it seemed, waiting patiently to be uncovered. 30-year-old Claire Bennett was a well-known figure within the Atherton College Library. Since her arrival as assistant to Eleanor Ainsworth, Claire had proven herself to be a bright and meticulous young woman with an innate talent for organizing and cataloging the literary treasures held by the institution. However, despite her professional competence, she always seemed to carry with her a shadow of insecurity that caused her to doubt herself at the most unexpected moments. For Claire, working under Eleanor's tutelage meant not only learning from one of the best librarians in the country, but also constantly struggling with the feeling of not being good enough. Eleanor, with her demanding and perfectionist nature, would often point out every little flaw in Claire's work, even when it was practically flawless. These criticisms, although well-intentioned on Eleanor's part, began to slowly erode Claire's self-confidence, leaving small emotional scars that never fully healed. Over the years, Claire developed clear aspirations. She wanted to become a professional archivist and eventually hold the coveted position of head librarian. It was a dream she nurtured with passion, but one that also filled her with anxiety. She knew Eleanor had no plans to retire anytime soon, and that certainty began to weigh on her like an invisible slab. In her mind, promotion to the position of head librarian was not just a career goal, but a way to prove herself to both Eleanor and the world. But every time she tried to talk to Eleanor about her aspirations, the answer was always the same. "You're not ready yet." Those words, spoken with the best of intentions, stuck deeply with Claire, who interpreted them as an absolute refusal to acknowledge her effort and dedication. And then came the argument that marked a breaking point in their relationship. It was a heated confrontation, one that left both women with harsh words echoing in their minds. Eleanor had publicly criticized a project Claire had been working on for weeks, pointing out flaws that Claire felt were unfair and unnecessary. That night, Claire left the library in tears, feeling humiliated and belittled in front of her colleagues. The day after finding Eleanor dead in her office, Claire seemed despondent, almost unrecognizable. Her usual nervous energy had been replaced by an eerie stillness. During the interrogation, she tried to maintain her composure, but it was clear that the situation was affecting her deeply. When Detective Sarah Whitaker asked her about her whereabouts the night of the crime, Claire explained that she had been organizing files in another room in the library until late. She said she needed to concentrate and catch up on some unfinished business, something she often did when she felt the work was piling up too much. Some employees confirmed seeing her there that night, but no one could pinpoint exactly what time she had arrived or when she left. That gap in her alibi left Sarah intrigued, though she decided not to jump to conclusions. The relationship between Claire and Eleanor had always been a mixture of closeness and tension. On the one hand, Eleanor saw Claire as a protégé, someone with potential who deserved guidance, but she also perceived her as an insecure young woman, someone who was not yet ready to take on great responsibility. For Claire, this perception was a difficult emotional burden to bear. She felt that no matter how much effort she put forth, she would never be seen as an equal by Eleanor. This complicated dynamic had created an atmosphere of growing resentment in Claire, although she tried to hide it behind a mask of professionalism. There were times when she seemed genuinely grateful for the opportunity to learn from Eleanor, but there were also times when her frustration threatened to spill out in the form of impulsive words or actions. During the debriefing, Claire seemed genuinely upset about Eleanor's death, but there was something about her demeanor that caught Sarah's attention. It was as if she was trying to convince herself that everything was going to be okay, repeating over and over that she just wanted to do her job to the best of her ability. She spoke of Eleanor with respect, acknowledging her talent and dedication, but also hinted at a certain bitterness. She acknowledged that Eleanor was amazing at what she did, but also admitted that she was sometimes too harsh, that perhaps she didn't realize how her words affected those around her. It was a phrase Sarah carefully jotted down in her notebook, aware that there might be more behind those words than Claire was willing to admit. What concerned Sarah most was the combination of motivation and opportunity. Claire had a clear motive for wanting to get rid of Eleanor: promotion to the position of head librarian, a goal she probably felt she would never achieve as long as Eleanor was in the way. She also had access to Eleanor's office, knew her habits, and knew exactly when she would be alone. All of this, coupled with her behavior during the interrogation, made Claire one of the prime suspects in the investigation. However, Sarah knew that, to get to the truth, she would need more than assumptions. She would have to follow every lead, check every detail, and make sure no piece of the puzzle was left unsolved. Because in a case as complex as this one, where human emotions played a central role, the truth could be hidden in the darkest corners of the human heart. Professor Adrian Moore, 50, was a respected figure within the academic world at Atherton College. Specializing in medieval manuscripts, his career had been marked by a deep love of ancient texts and his ability to decipher stories hidden in dusty scrolls and forgotten books. His office, always filled with worn maps, illuminated plates, and small historical artifacts, seemed an extension of his personality: meticulous, scholarly, and somewhat melancholy. For decades, Adrian had been close friends with Eleanor Ainsworth, sharing with her not only his passion for rare books, but also long conversations about the value of preserving knowledge for future generations. However, that once solid and trusting relationship had deteriorated in recent months due to professional differences that had strained their friendship. Adrian was a lonely man, divorced for 5 years, whose personal life was marked by the emotional and financial scars of his failed marriage. His house, located on the outskirts of campus near a dense, silent forest, reflected his state of mind: stark, cluttered, and slightly unkempt. The windows were always covered by heavy curtains, as if trying to keep the outside world at bay, while inside an air of abandonment and weariness reigned. The divorce had left him with a series of accumulated debts that haunted him like persistent shadows, and his salary as a university professor was barely enough to cover basic expenses. In desperation, Adrian had begun to look for ways to make a quick buck, even if it meant crossing ethical boundaries he had never considered before. Speculation that Adrian attempted to illegally sell some rare books from Eleanor's collection arose after several colleagues noticed his odd behavior in the months leading up to the crime. Eleanor, ever protective of the library's treasures, discovered what Adrian was doing and confronted him. According to rumors, she threatened to report him to university and legal authorities if he did not immediately stop his actions. For Adrian, This threat represented not only possible professional ruin, but also the ultimate loss of the one person who had once supported him unconditionally. The tension between them became evident to those who worked nearby, and although both tried to conceal it in public, it was clear that their friendship was broken. When the news of Eleanor's death reached Adrian's ears, his reaction was restrained but charged with palpable sadness. He attended the memorial organized by the university and spoke moving words about the importance of his work and his tireless dedication to the library. However, those watching closely noticed something in his gaze. A mixture of grief, guilt, and perhaps even something darker. It was inevitable that Detective Sarah Whitaker would put him on her list of persons of interest, given his connection to Eleanor and the rumors circulating about him. During the interrogation, Adrian was calm but reserved, as if he knew exactly how to present himself in front of the law. He explained that on the night of Eleanor's death, he had been walking alone along the forest path near his house. He described his nightly routine in detail, mentioning that he used to take long walks to clear his mind and reflect on his personal problems. However, when Sarah asked him about his relationship with Eleanor, his tone changed subtly. He became more defensive, although he maintained a polite attitude. He denied any significant conflict with her, attributing past tensions to simple differences of opinion over the management of library funds. He insisted that Eleanor was a brilliant but stubborn woman, someone who was not always easy to work with, but that he would never have wished any ill will for her. What most caught Sarah's attention during the interrogation was the lack of witnesses who could corroborate Adrian's alibi. Only he could confirm that he had been walking in the woods that night, which created a significant gap in his version of events. Moreover, his attitude, though calculated and calm, had something forced about it, as if he were reciting a rehearsed script. Sarah knew that culprits often revealed more than they intended through small gestures or inconsistencies in their stories, and Adrian was no exception. His insistence on presenting himself as a blameless man, concerned only with the welfare of the university, seemed almost too perfect, as if he was trying to convince himself as much as others. After weeks of exhaustive investigation, the case finally began to unravel thanks to a series of subtle but revealing clues that led to the truth. Detective Sarah Whitaker had spent long hours going through every detail, looking for connections between the objects found at the crime scene and the people involved. It was then that a small, rusty metal object, almost overlooked at first, became a key piece of the puzzle. After careful analysis, it was determined that the fragment belonged to an old brooch that Claire Bennett had mentioned months earlier that she had lost. At the time, no one gave this seemingly insignificant loss much thought, but now the find took on a whole new meaning. The fact that Claire's brooch was in Eleanor's office the night of the crime was not a coincidence, but evidence that began to weave an incriminating web around her. Another crucial clue came from the forensic analysis of a recent dust stain found on the edge of Eleanor's desk. That seemingly harmless stain contained tiny particles of cosmetics that, after analysis, turned out to be unique to a brand used by Claire. It was an unnoticed trace, something so small that she herself probably didn't even notice it had been left behind. For Sarah, however, this discovery was like a light in the midst of darkness. It suggested that Claire had touched the desk recently, perhaps while trying to clean or manipulate something in the slightly ajar center drawer. This detail, combined with the missing brooch, began to paint a clearer picture of what had really happened that fateful night. The puzzle finally took shape when Victoria Lane, Eleanor's occasional student assistant, admitted during further questioning to seeing Claire enter the office shortly before the library closed. Victoria had been hesitant to mention it earlier, fearing to unfairly implicate someone, but under Sarah's prodding, she decided to share what she had witnessed. Her testimony corroborated the suspicions that had already built up around Claire, adding yet another layer of certainty to the investigation. Now, with multiple pieces of evidence pointing in the same direction, Sarah knew it was only a matter of time before Claire succumbed under the pressure of irrefutable facts. Finally, after intense but carefully measured questioning, Claire Bennett confessed. She admitted that she had argued with Eleanor about the rare books, and that, in an impulsive fit, she had poured a lethal amount of aconitine into her teacup while pretending to look for a file. In her mind, it had all been a momentary act of desperation, an attempt to silence the constant criticism and ensure that nothing would stand in her way of becoming head librarian. However, her plan quickly turned into a nightmare when she realized what she had done. To cover up her crime, she pretended to be busy in another room in the library, creating an alibi that, while fragile, she hoped would be enough to deflect suspicion. The use of aconitine was particularly revealing. This substance, extremely difficult to obtain, indicated a level of premeditation that could not be ignored. Further investigation revealed that Claire had illegally accessed the university's botany lab weeks before the crime, probably to acquire the poison without arousing suspicion. In addition, the brooch fragment was accidentally caught while she was trying to clean any incriminating evidence from the drawer where she kept compromising documents. Every action she took, although meticulously planned, left small traces that eventually led to her discovery. With Claire's confession, the case came to a resolution. The university community was shocked to discover that someone so close to Eleanor had been capable of committing such a heinous act. For Sarah Whitaker, this case once again underscored the complexity of human nature and how emotions, when unchecked, can lead to devastating decisions. Although justice had been served, Eleanor Ainsworth's shadow would remain in the library, reminding everyone that even in the quietest, most knowledgeable places, human passions can unleash unpredictable tragedies. The Claire Bennett trial was an event that captured the attention of the entire university community and beyond. During the trial, the evidence presented by the prosecution painted a clear and incriminating picture. The brooch fragment, the cosmetic remnants on the desk, and her taped confession created a narrative that was impossible to dismantle. Claire, although she initially tried to argue that her action had been impulsive and not premeditated, was cornered by the irrefutable evidence of the use of aconitine, a poison that could not have been used by accident. The judge ruled that the crime had been committed with malice aforethought, given the planning involved in obtaining the poison and the subsequent attempted cover-up. Claire was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of early parole, a sentence that reflected the seriousness of her act. Atherton College issued an official statement regretting the tragedy and announcing significant changes to its internal security protocols to prevent future incidents. For many students and employees, Eleanor's absence left a void impossible to fill, while Claire's fall served as a grim reminder of how unbridled ambition can corrupt even those who seem closest and most trusted. Ultimately, the case became a warning about the dangers of allowing resentment and despair to eclipse morality. Case 2. In the elegant and seemingly tranquil city of Savannah, Georgia, a place that seems to have stood still in time, with its cobblestone streets lined with stately oaks draped in Spanish moss, its ancient mansions that tell stories of centuries past, and its southern atmosphere charged with charm and mystery, this city breathes an almost unreal beauty. But beneath that idyllic facade, as in so many other places, there also beats a dark heart, and it was precisely there, in the heart of Savannah, that Julian Davenport's life came to its abrupt and mysterious end. Julian Davenport, a man whose presence was as imposing as his talent, had been one of the most acclaimed conductors of his generation. His name resonated in the world's most prestigious concert halls, from Carnegie Hall to the Paris Opera. Yet on that gray, damp Savannah morning, his figure no longer commanded admiration or respect. His lifeless body rested in his studio, a spacious room with high ceilings that once vibrated with the notes of the greatest scores ever written. Now that same space was tinged with tragedy, shrouded in an oppressive silence that seemed to mock the musical legacy Julian had built over decades. The studio, still illuminated by the lamps that he himself had probably lit before his death. The shelves filled with books, sheet music, and musical trophies, witnesses to a life devoted to art, now seemed to survey the scene with a mixture of awe and grief. In the center of it all, Julian lay in his favorite leather armchair, leaning forward as if he had tried to rise just before he fell. His face, motionless but full of expression, revealed a mixture of surprise and pain, his eyes open but empty, staring into infinity. It was as if the last note of his existence had been abruptly plucked away, leaving a heartbreaking echo in the air. Beside him on the floor lay the shattered remains of his valuable Stradivarius violin, an instrument that had been his inseparable companion for years, and which, according to some experts, was worth millions of dollars. But what was most shocking was not only the fact that the violin was irreparably damaged, but the fury with which it had been destroyed. Every splinter, every fragment of wood scattered across the floor seemed to scream a cruel truth. The killer had not only wanted to end Julian's life, but also his legacy. It was a deliberate act of vandalism, charged with hatred or perhaps revenge. The desk in front of him was covered with scattered papers, some stained with blood, as if they had been thrown in a frenzy. Among those papers, investigators found several threatening anonymous letters addressed to Julian. Cryptic phrases like, "Your time has come," and "The music of your life will stop soon," suggested that someone had been planning this for some time. Next to the letters, an empty glass and a half-full bottle of whiskey indicated that Julian may have been drinking before his death, perhaps trying to calm his thoughts or coping with something he couldn't solve with his musical genius. A shattered picture frame was found on the ground near the body. The image inside the frame showed Julian next to a young woman, probably his daughter. The splintered glass reflected the light from the lamps, creating small sparkles that seemed to mock the tragedy. It was as if even the inanimate objects knew that something irreparable had happened there. Who could have gotten close enough to commit such a brutal act? And what kind of bond could justify such violence? The murder weapon was not found at the scene, but there were obvious signs of a struggle. One of the chairs was overturned, and a Persian rug was crumpled in one corner, as if someone had been dragged during a struggle. Neighbors reported hearing a muffled scream around 10:30 p.m., followed by a loud bang that rattled the windows. However, no one suspected anything until Emma Miller, Julian's personal assistant, arrived the next morning to begin her workday and discovered the body. The investigation was left in the hands of Detective Marcus Hale, a middle-aged man whose weathered face reflected both wisdom and weariness. Marcus had a reputation for being meticulous and patient, qualities that had made him one of Savannah's most respected investigators. His calm, methodical approach contrasted with the intensity of the case he now had on his hands. Upon entering Julian's study, Marcus immediately sensed the heaviness of the atmosphere, as if the room itself was trying to tell him a story he could not yet fully comprehend. With every step he took, Marcus absorbed the details of the crime scene. He looked at the threatening letters, the smashed violin, the shattered picture frame, all seeming to form part of a complex puzzle. Everything seemed to be part of a complex puzzle, but key pieces were missing. What had driven someone to commit such an extreme act against a man who, despite his flaws, had dedicated his life to creating beauty? Marcus knew that finding the answers would not be easy, but he also knew that, somewhere, the truth was waiting to be discovered. And as he examined the scene, one thought crossed his mind. In Savannah, where history and the present are constantly intertwined, the key to solving this mystery might be hidden in the past. Julian Davenport, 52, was a man whose life revolved around music. Born and raised in Savannah, Georgia, he showed exceptional talent for the violin from an early age. His passion and dedication led him to the prestigious Juilliard Conservatory, where his skill was not only recognized but celebrated in the highest musical circles. Over time, Julian established himself as one of the world's most respected conductors, leading performances at iconic venues such as Carnegie Hall and the Paris Opera. His name became synonymous with artistic excellence, and his legacy seemed indestructible. However, behind that facade of professional success, Julian's personal life was marked by a series of tragedies that left deep scars. 5 years ago, his wife Margaret was killed in a tragic car accident, an event that forever changed the family dynamic. Although Julian tried to remain strong, the loss of Margaret left a void that he was never able to fill. His relationship with his 24-year-old daughter Emily also suffered in the aftermath. Emily, who now lives in New York working as a contemporary dancer, shared a love of the arts with her father, but their creative and generational differences often led to intense arguments. Julian was known for being a perfectionist and demanding, qualities that led to his success, but also alienated him from those who loved him most. In addition to family tensions, Julian faced other challenges in recent months. Rumors of financial problems related to the management of his charitable foundation for young musicians began to circulate among his close circles. Although he never spoke openly about these concerns, those who knew him well noticed that he seemed more stressed than usual. Julian had always been a reserved man, someone who preferred to carry his burdens in silence. But this time, the weight seemed to have increased considerably. Detective Marcus Hale, a man of imposing presence and penetrating gaze, prepared to take the next crucial step in the investigation. With a notebook in hand and an impassive expression, he knew that the interrogations would be the key to unraveling the secrets hidden behind Eleanor Ainsworth's death. Every word, every gesture, could reveal something more about the mystery. Taking a deep breath, Marcus made his way to the room where the first witnesses were waiting. ready to listen carefully and uncover the truths that lay beneath the surface. Emma Miller, 30, was an inconspicuous but omnipresent figure in Julian Davenport's life. For the past 3 years, she had worked as his personal assistant, playing a crucial role in organizing his busy schedule and managing the minute details of his professional and personal life. Emma was known for her efficiency, her meticulousness, and her almost obsessive loyalty to Julian. However, there were also those who whispered that her control could become excessive, especially when it came to protecting the conductor's legacy. Her constant presence in Julian's life not only made her indispensable, but also vulnerable to any change or conflict in their working relationship. She lived alone in a modest apartment in the heart of Savannah, a functional but impersonal space that reflected her almost exclusive dedication to work. Although her private life seemed deliberately austere, Emma had built her identity around her role with Julian. It was she who screened phone calls, arranged meetings, coordinated international travel, and kept the financial records of the charitable foundation for young musicians that Julian had founded years earlier in order. Her complete access to Julian's home and studio, as well as her detailed knowledge of his daily habits, made her a central part of the investigation. No one knew better than Emma how Julian Davenport's life worked. However, in the weeks leading up to the crime, disturbing rumors surfaced about discrepancies in the charity's accounting records. Some close sources mentioned that Julian had begun to question the transparency of certain financial transactions, leading to speculation that he might consider firing Emma. For someone as deeply committed to her job as she was, this threat must have been devastating. Emma adamantly denied any involvement in wrongdoing, vehemently defending herself against those who insinuated otherwise. But the tensions between the two were evident to those who watched them closely. The loyalty that once defined their relationship seemed to be eroding under the weight of suspicions and misgivings. When it came time to be questioned by Detective Marcus Hale, Emma showed a mixture of nervousness and determination. Dressed impeccably, as if to project an image of innocence and professionalism, she answered every question with precision. According to her version, the night of the crime she had been alone in her apartment watching a movie on Netflix. She described in detail the movie she allegedly watched, even mentioning some key moments of the plot. However, when Marcus asked her to confirm her alibi with any witnesses, Emma lowered her gaze, unable to offer a solid answer. Living alone meant there was no one who could corroborate her story, leaving a troubling gap in her statement. Detective Hale, aware of the importance of not prematurely ruling out any suspects, decided to delve deeper into Emma's life. He knew her relationship with Julian was complex, full of layers that still needed to be unraveled. Emma had clear reason to feel threatened by the possibility of losing her job, especially considering how much her identity depended on her work with him. Moreover, her unfettered access to Julian's home and studio made any scenario plausible. While there was no conclusive evidence linking her directly to the crime, her lack of a solid alibi placed her in a delicate position within the investigation. Marcus Hale couldn't help but wonder if Emma was really guilty or just another victim of circumstance. Her behavior during the interrogation was calculated, almost rehearsed, but also revealing of deeper emotions: fear, frustration, and perhaps a trace of regret. Whatever the truth behind her involvement, it was clear that Emma Miller was much more than just a personal assistant. In a case full of unknowns, her role remained one of the most ambiguous and difficult to decipher. Emily Davenport, 24, was Julian Davenport's only child. Although she shared with her father a deep passion for the arts, their paths could not have been more different. While Julian had dedicated his existence to classical music, reaching unimaginable heights in that world, Emily found her vocation in contemporary dance, a discipline that for Julian never seemed to live up to his family name. From a young age, Emily struggled with the unrealistic expectations her father imposed on her, making their relationship strained and complicated. For Julian, success wasn't just a personal achievement, it was a standard that everyone around him had to live up to. And although Emily loved her father deeply, that constant pressure created an emotional distance that was difficult to overcome. The last time Emily visited Savannah, it was in the midst of a particularly intense dispute with Julian. The argument revolved around her career as a dancer, a profession Julian considered unstable and insufficiently prestigious. For years, Emily had tried to prove to him that her talent was as valid as that of any classical musician, but Julian's criticisms always found a way to destabilize her. In a recorded conversation between them, Emily let slip a frustration-laden phrase. "I can't live in your shadow all my life." Those words, though spoken in a moment of grief, resonated strongly throughout the investigation of the crime. For many, including Detective Marcus Hale, that phrase encapsulated the complex dynamic between father and daughter, a mixture of love, admiration, and resentment that had marked their relationship for years. Emily returned to Savannah recently, not by choice, but because she felt she needed to face her father one more time. She was living in New York, working as a dancer in an emerging contemporary company, but family tensions led her to take a brief break and return to the city where she grew up. Although she tried to stay away from Julian, her presence in Savannah inevitably brought them closer again. This time, however, the atmosphere between them seemed more tense than ever. Emily was determined to defend her independence, while Julian continued to cling to the idea that his daughter could aspire to something better. This conflict affected not only the two of them, but also those around them, who could feel the electricity in the air every time they were together. When Julian's body was found lifeless in his study, Emily quickly became a prime suspect. Not only did she have emotional motives for distancing herself from her father, but also a significant financial incentive. As the sole heir to his fortune, Emily would receive a substantial sum after Julian's death, which could have been a key factor in ridding her of the overbearing figure that dominated her life. In addition, by eliminating Julian, Emily would avoid future family confrontations, ensuring her creative and personal freedom. These elements made Detective Marcus Hale focus his attention on her, although without ruling out other possibilities. During the interrogation, Emily maintained a firm but emotional posture. Dressed in simple clothing, as if to project an image of vulnerability, she explained that on the night of the crime she had been at a local bar with friends. Two witnesses corroborated her account, confirming that they saw her there until approximately 10 p.m. However, Emily admitted that she left the place early, arguing that she felt tired and wanted to rest. That statement left a sufficient margin of time for her to have committed the crime, especially considering that Julian's residence was relatively close to the bar. Although Emily adamantly denied any involvement in the murder, her incomplete alibi generated reasonable doubt in Detective Hale's mind. What made Emily even more suspicious was her intimate knowledge of Julian's life. She had grown up in that house, knew every corner, every habit of his father's, and of course knew how much his Stradivarius violin meant to him. Destroying that instrument would have been a powerful symbolic act, almost as if someone wanted to erase not only Julian's life, but also his musical legacy. Although Emily had always shown respect for her father's art, her resentment toward him might have led to an impulsive and desperate act. The idea that someone close to Julian could have crossed that line was disturbing, but not impossible. Despite her suspicions, Emily was also aware that any misstep could incriminate her further. During the interrogation, she showed a mixture of sadness and determination, as if she was dealing with the loss of her father while trying to defend her innocence. Her eyes filled with tears when she spoke of Julian, recalling happy times in her childhood before expectations and conflict drove them apart. Yet there was also something in her tone, a certain stiffness in her answers that made Marcus Hale wonder if she was hiding something. Was it possible that Emily had acted out of years of pent-up frustration? Or on the other hand, was she simply another victim of circumstance caught in a web of unfair suspicion? Thomas Davenport, 56, was Julian's older brother, and a man whose life seemed to move in a very different direction from that of his famous brother. While Julian dedicated his existence to art and music, Thomas had built his career in the business world, where his shrewdness and ambition led him to amass a considerable fortune. After retirement, he decided to invest in real estate, a decision that initially seemed promising but over time began to show cracks. Although he had always been known for his ability to get out of difficult situations, this time things were looking more complicated. Thomas desperately needed money to save a failed investment, a financial crisis that threatened not only his economic stability, but also his reputation as a successful man. The relationship between Thomas and Julian had always been marked by tensions and rivalries dating back to their childhood. From a young age, the two had constantly competed, whether it was in academics, sports, or even in the attention of their parents. However, while Julian found his way to fame and international recognition, Thomas was relegated to the background, something he never quite managed to accept. Although in public the two maintained a facade of brotherly courtesy, Those who knew them well knew that their relationship was far from harmonious. Thomas tended to see Julian as someone privileged, someone who had succeeded effortlessly, while he himself had had to struggle hard for every achievement. This perception fueled a mixture of resentment and admiration that, over the years, became a kind of silent obsession. As Thomas's financial situation began to deteriorate, his mind inevitably turned to Julian's valuable assets. He knew that his brother owned priceless items, including the legendary Stradivarius violin that represented not only a material fortune, but also the heart of Julian's musical legacy. For someone like Thomas, accustomed to calculating risks and rewards, the Stradivarius might have been seen as a tempting solution to his problems. Moreover, there were indications that Thomas had tried to blackmail Julian with compromising information about the charitable foundation he ran. Although never openly proven, some documents and emails suggested that Thomas was aware of certain financial irregularities within the organization, something he could have used as leverage against his brother. During the interrogation, Thomas appeared calm and confident, as if he knew exactly how to handle the situation. Dressed impeccably, in a suit that reflected his refined style, he answered Detective Marcus Hale's questions with almost rehearsed precision. According to his version, on the night of the crime, he had been dining with his wife at an exclusive Savannah restaurant, a place frequented by the local elite. The restaurant staff confirmed his presence, asserting that Thomas had been there for much of the evening. However, they admitted that he left briefly to make a phone call, leaving a window of time that, while small, could have been enough to commit the crime. Thomas explained that the call was of an urgent nature and related to one of his businesses, but provided no additional details or witnesses who could corroborate his account. Detective Hale watched Thomas carefully as he spoke. There was something about his attitude that was unsettling, a mixture of overconfidence and subtle evasiveness that made it difficult to dismiss him as a suspect. Thomas was a calculating man, someone who always thought several steps ahead, and that made him a formidable adversary in the investigation. His knowledge of Julian's life, as well as his indirect access to the family home, put him in a delicate position. In addition, his desperate need for money and his obvious resentment towards his brother created a clear and compelling motive. However, there was no direct evidence linking him to the crime, and his alibi, though incomplete, remained solid on the surface. Despite the doubts surrounding Thomas, it was also true that he lacked conclusive evidence directly incriminating him. His brief absence from the restaurant left room for speculation, but it was not enough to build a solid case. Moreover, his wife, who had been present during the dinner, supported his version, although her testimony could be influenced by spousal loyalty. Detective Hale knew that Thomas was a smart man, capable of covering his tracks if he had actually been involved in the crime. But he also knew that, in a case like this, where emotions and financial interests were dangerously intertwined, he could not afford to Eleanor Monroe as a woman of commanding presence, whose elegance and sophistication made her stand out in any room she occupied. Owner of an art gallery in the heart of Savannah, she had built a solid reputation as a talented curator and an influential figure in the city's cultural world. However, her relationship with Julian Davenport added a layer of complexity to her public life. More than a decade earlier, Eleanor and Julian had shared an intense but stormy relationship, marked by emotional ups and downs and challenges that eventually led to their separation. What made it even more painful for Eleanor was the way Julian decided to end the relationship, publicly and unceremoniously, leaving her exposed to friends, colleagues, and mutual acquaintances. That breakup left deep scars on her, although Eleanor always tried to project an image of strength and composure. Over time, the two managed to rebuild a close friendship of sorts, or so it seemed from the outside. Although Julian never became romantically involved with Eleanor again, she remained part of his inner circle, someone with whom he shared conversations about art, music, and creative projects. However, those who observed their dynamic could not help but notice certain underlying tensions. Some suspected that Eleanor still harbored resentments toward Julian, a feeling that might have intensified recently when she tried to reach out to him again, seeking more than just friendship. Julian, always firm in his decisions, flatly rejected any possibility of becoming emotionally involved with her again. This rejection, coupled with open wounds from the past, may have been enough to fan old flames of anger and humiliation in Eleanor's heart. Eleanor became one of the names that quickly appeared on the list of suspects. Her personal history with Julian, full of passion, pain, and rejection, offered clear emotional grounds for considering her implicated in the crime. In addition, Her access to Julian's private life, as well as her knowledge of his habits and routines, placed her in a vulnerable position within the investigation. To Detective Marcus Hale, Eleanor was an intriguing figure, a seemingly composed woman, but one whose emotions always seemed to be on the verge of boiling over. Her bond with Julian was too complex to dismiss without a thorough analysis. During the interrogation, Eleanor appeared serene but visibly affected by Julian's death. Dressed in discreet clothing, as if she wanted to go unnoticed, she answered the detective's questions with a mixture of sadness and dignity. According to her account, on the night of the crime she had attended an art auction, an exclusive event attended by collectors and important Savannah personalities. Several attendees corroborated her presence, claiming they saw her there for much of the evening. However, Eleanor admitted that she left early due to a severe headache, something she explained tended to happen to her when she was under stress or emotionally drained. That brief absence from the event left a window of time that, while limited, raised reasonable doubts in Detective Hale's mind. Had she used that excuse to get away long enough to commit the crime? What made Eleanor even more suspicious was her intimate knowledge of Julian's life, including his weaknesses and most prized possessions. Destroying the Stradivarius violin, an object that symbolized both Julian's musical legacy and his artistic soul, could have been a deliberately cruel act, designed to inflict maximum emotional damage. For someone like Eleanor, whose career in the art world had taught her to deeply value cultural symbols, such a gesture might have had special meaning. Perhaps she sought not only to eliminate Julian, but also to erase his influence and memory in a way that would be as devastating as the murder itself. Despite her suspicions, Eleanor was also aware that any misstep could incriminate her further. During the interrogation, she displayed a mixture of vulnerability and control, as if dealing with a range of conflicting emotions. Her eyes filled with tears as she spoke of Julian, recalling happy moments from their past relationship and expressing admiration for his musical genius. Yet there was also something in her tone, a certain stiffness in her responses that made Marcus Hale wonder if she was hiding something. Was it possible that Eleanor had acted out of years of pent-up resentment? Or, on the other hand, was she just another victim of circumstance caught in a web of unfair suspicion? The Julian Davenport murder case seemed to be embroiled in a tangle of clues, complex relationships, and intertwined motivations. However, the resolution came when investigators decided to analyze the fingerprints found on the shattered fragments of the Stradivarius, the violin that represented not only a material fortune, but also Julian's musical soul. To everyone's surprise, the prints belonged to Emma Miller, his personal assistant and someone he trusted completely. Initially, Emma denied any connection to the object, arguing that she had never touched the violin or been near it. But under the pressure of irrefutable evidence and the weight of exhaustive cross-examination, she finally relented. In a trembling voice, she confessed that she had used the Stradivarius as a distraction tool during the night of the crime, while arguing with Julian about her professional future and allegations of financial irregularities at the charity. However, what began as an individual confession soon revealed a much darker conspiracy. Emma admitted that she had not acted alone. Thomas Davenport, Julian's older brother, was deeply involved in the scheme. According to Emma, Thomas skillfully manipulated her, promising to solve her financial problems if she agreed to help him eliminate Julian. Together, they plotted a meticulous strategy to commit the crime, using the Stradivarius as a centerpiece to divert attention to potential suspects emotionally affected by the loss of the instrument. The symbolic cruelty of destroying the violin was intended not only to erase Julian's musical legacy, but also to cast doubt on who might have committed such an act. The investigation intensified when detectives discovered fibers from Thomas's jacket attached to the fragments of the Stradivarius. This finding was crucial in confirming Thomas's direct involvement in the crime. But the decisive blow came when the murder weapon, a fireplace poker, was found buried in the garden of Thomas's residence. Forensic tests showed that the poker contained traces of Julian's blood and hair, definitively sealing the conspirators' fate. Both were arrested and faced charges of conspiracy and first-degree murder, marking the end of a case that had deeply shaken the Savannah community. The trial of Emma Miller and Thomas Davenport captured the attention of Savannah and the art world. Both were formally charged with conspiracy and first-degree murder, facing the compelling evidence presented by the prosecution. The fingerprints on the fragments of the Stradivarius, the fibers from Thomas's jacket, and the murder weapon found on his property. During the trial, Emma tried to argue that she had been manipulated by Thomas, who, she claimed, had pressured her with false promises to solve her financial problems. However, the prosecution proved that both had actively participated in the planning of the crime. The jury found both defendants guilty, and the judge handed down a severe sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for Thomas, while Emma received a reduced sentence due to her partial collaboration during the investigation. The decision made it clear that justice would not tolerate such acts of treason and cruelty, especially against such a beloved figure as Julian Davenport. The consequences of the case resonated beyond the courtroom. Julian's reputation remained intact, but his musical legacy suffered an irreparable blow with the destruction of the Stradivarius. As for Emma and Thomas, their names became synonymous with unbridled ambition and betrayal, marking a dark chapter in the city's history. The Savannah community, though shaken, found solace in honoring Julian's memory through his music, assuring that his genius would never be forgotten. Case 3. In the heart of Silicon Valley, where the world's most innovative ideas come to life and technology seems to defy the limits of the possible, a shadow loomed over the glow of progress. The luxury apartment in Palo Alto, designed in a minimalist style that seemed to have emerged from a futuristic dream, offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the city illuminated by thousands of artificial lights. From its windows, one could feel as if floating above a sea of man-made stars. However, that night, the place had turned into a macabre scenario where the meticulously designed beauty brutally clashed with the harshness of reality. Luke Henry's body was discovered lying face down on a pristine white carpet, now stained with the traces of a tragedy that had yet to unravel. His desk, cluttered with monitors and high-tech equipment, appeared to be the shrine of a modern genius, a space where code and creativity converged to shape innovations that could change the world. But that night, that same desk had been transformed into the epicenter of something much darker. Near his right hand, outstretched as if he had tried to hold on to something before falling, was an empty bottle of sleeping pills and a nearly finished bottle of whiskey. At first glance, everything indicated an accidental or perhaps even self-inflicted overdose. However, those who knew Luke well knew that he was anything but someone given to losing control. He was a brilliant programmer, meticulous to the extreme, and his life revolved around solving problems, not creating them. It was then that details began to emerge, small pieces of a puzzle that did not fit the initial narrative. A USB plug disconnected from the port of one of the monitors immediately caught the eye. Next to it, a hastily scribbled note in a notebook displayed cryptic words: blockchain, password, limit 42, and don't trust them. Each word seemed laden with hidden meaning, as if Luke had left behind an encrypted message, a warning intended for whoever encountered that scene. The trembling letters suggested haste, fear, perhaps even desperation, but what really made the investigators feel a chill run down their spines were the physical details. Traces of dirt under Luke's fingernails indicated that he had been involved in some sort of struggle before he died. His hands, usually engaged in typing lines of code with surgical precision, seemed to have clung to something or someone in a last-ditch attempt to resist. The cell phone, thrown against the opposite wall, was intentionally smashed, as if someone had wanted to make sure that any trace of communication was erased forever. And then there were the marks on the front door frame, muddy footprints on the floor, unmistakable signs that someone had entered there, perhaps without permission. The arrival of the detective in charge of the investigation only deepened the mystery. He was a legendary figure in the local police department, known as much for his unerring instincts as for his ability to read between the lines. His name was James Callahan, a middle-aged man whose silver temples gave him an air of accumulated wisdom from years of tackling the most complex cases. Callahan had a reputation for being relentless but fair, someone who never settled for superficial answers or convenient theories. His reputation preceded every step he took, and this time would be no different. As Callahan crossed the threshold of the apartment, his gaze slowly swept over every nook and cranny, absorbing every detail without judgment. He knew that the darkest secrets were often hidden in the most obvious places, disguised as chance or accident. He observed the position of the body, noting how Luke's head rested slightly to one side, as if he had turned sharply before falling. He looked at the whiskey bottle and empty flask, wondering if they were really part of the final act or mere tools to distract. The night wore on, And as investigators worked hard to piece together the events leading up to Luke Carter's death, one thing became clear. Nothing was as it seemed. In a world where technology controlled everything from finances to personal relationships, the truth was often hidden behind layers of code and encryption. But Callahan knew that sooner or later, the right code would be cracked, and the truth would come out. Luke Henry, 28, was a prodigious programmer whose life revolved around cryptocurrency security and the blockchain world. From a young age, he demonstrated an almost innate fascination with numbers and logic, a quality that led him to excel in his studies and eventually become one of the most respected names in his field. Specializing in creating innovative algorithms, Luke had worked with some of the leading companies in financial technology, developing systems that ensured secure and transparent transactions. His ability to anticipate vulnerabilities in complex platforms earned him international recognition, especially after discovering a critical flaw in a cryptocurrency exchange system that, had it gone undetected, would have cost investors around the world millions of dollars. An only child, Luke grew up in Seattle, where his parents, both retired college professors, always supported him unconditionally. Although they maintained a close relationship, Luke's demanding career had created some physical distance between them. His parents understood his dedication and ambition, but they also longed for the days when their son had time to visit them without the constant pressure of urgent projects or work trips. Despite the distance, Luke always found times to call them, sharing small details of his life, though he avoided getting too deep into the risks and challenges he faced in his profession. Recently, Luke had begun to express concerns to his close friends. While investigating potential fraud at a cryptocurrency startup, he mentioned receiving veiled threats, something he attributed to the sensitive nature of his work. However, these warnings didn't seem to stop him. Luke was known for his tireless determination, always willing to press on even when others would have backed down. Single and secretive about his personal life, some rumors suggested that he had a secret relationship with a colleague, although he never confirmed anything about it. To those who knew him, Luke was a brilliant but enigmatic man, someone whose legacy was destined to live on far beyond his brief time in this world. With the first clues gathered and suspects identified, Detective James Callahan knew the time had come to dig deeper for the truth. Every interrogation was an opportunity to unravel secrets hidden behind masks of apparent innocence. With methodical calm, he prepared his notebook and reviewed the key details of the case. Now in the interrogation room, where emotions could run high or silences speak louder than words, Callahan was ready to confront those who held the answers he sought. The truth awaited behind one of those doors. Clara Logan, 30, was a towering figure within Quantum Crypt, a leading blockchain security company that had earned its reputation through innovation and customer trust. Clara served as the direct boss of Luke Henry, the brilliant programmer whose death had shaken the very foundations of the company. From the outside, Clara appeared to be the embodiment of corporate success, ambitious, meticulous, and with a relentless focus on achieving excellence. However, those who worked closely with her knew that her obsession with protecting Quantum Crypt's reputation went beyond the professional. Clara had clear aspirations to become the company's next CEO, and she was willing to do whatever it took to ensure that her path to the top was smooth. Her relationship with Luke had always been complicated. While she openly acknowledged Luke's exceptional talent, Clara also saw him as a potential threat. He was young, charismatic, and possessed a unique ability to uncover vulnerabilities that others overlooked. But what really unsettled Clara wasn't just the competition. It was what Luke had recently begun to uncover. For weeks, Luke had been investigating irregularities in transactions conducted through Quantum Crypt's platform. What he found was devastating. Evidence of fraudulent activity carefully hidden under layers of technical complexity. When investigators began questioning her about the night of Luke's death, Clara displayed an almost rehearsed calm. According to her version of events, she had spent the entire night working from home on a crucial report related to an upcoming product launch. It was typical of her to be engrossed in her work until the wee hours of the morning, perfecting every detail and making sure nothing was left to chance. To back up her alibi, she submitted activity logs from her computer, supposedly proving that she had been online throughout that time. However, forensic experts soon noticed something peculiar. The logs could have been tampered with. Although not conclusive, this possibility cast doubt on the veracity of her statement. Clara was known for her ability to plan every move with surgical precision. Her obsession with control and her determination to maintain Quantum Crypt's impeccable image meant that any hint of scandal was seen as a personal threat. To her, Luke was not just a talented subordinate, he was a calculated risk that was no longer manageable. The night of Luke's death, according to preliminary records, coincided with a critical moment for Quantum Crypt. The company was about to announce a new round of investment that promised to take it to another level in the technology market. Any controversy at that time would have been devastating. Clara, aware of this, had more than enough reason to want to silence Luke before he could act. Her overweening ambition and her need to protect the company's reputation placed her in an awkward position vis-a-vis the investigators. Although she maintained a facade of innocence and professionalism, there was something about her behavior that was suspicious. Her insistence on providing digital evidence, for example, seemed too perfect, as if she had anticipated that it would be needed. As the investigation progressed, investigators began to reconstruct Clara's movements in the days leading up to Luke's death. They discovered that she had been noticeably nervous in team meetings, constantly checking her phone and avoiding discussions about the projects Luke was working on. It was also noted that she had made several late-night calls from her cell phone, although she refused to disclose who she had spoken to. Her behavior, while not conclusive evidence, raised difficult questions. Why would someone as dedicated to her work as Clara need to take extra precautions? What was she trying to hide? Ryan Miller, 26, was one of the youngest programmers at Quantum Crypt, but his talent and enthusiasm had quickly propelled him to the top of the team. Early on, Ryan had earned a reputation as someone creative, capable of coming up with innovative solutions to complex problems. However, he was also known for his professional insecurity, a trait that made him vulnerable to constant comparisons with his colleagues. Among them, Luke Henry was perhaps the most brilliant, and that difference between the two began to mark a rift in their relationship. What was once a fruitful collaboration between two like minds gradually became a tension-filled competition. Ryan felt that Luke was stealing credit from him for joint ideas, taking credit for achievements that he felt should have been shared equally. This perceived unfairness fueled in Ryan a toxic mix of jealousy and resentment. The conflict came to a head when Luke directly accused Ryan of leaking confidential company data. According to Luke, some sensitive information had found its way into the hands of third parties, and the evidence pointed to Ryan as the possible culprit. Although conclusive evidence was never presented, the accusation left a deep mark on Ryan. For him, it was not only a personal affront, but also a threat to his career. He felt Luke was using his position and recognition within Quantum Crypt to discredit him, perhaps even to marginalize him within the company. Every interaction between them since then was tinged with tension, and Ryan found himself increasingly isolated, consumed by the feeling that Luke was actively conspiring against him. The night Luke was found dead, Ryan claimed to have been playing online video games until the wee hours of the morning. According to his account, he had spent hours immersed in multiplayer games, interacting with virtual friends and completely disconnecting from the real world. As proof of his alibi, Ryan provided chat logs showing real-time conversations during the period in question. However, the researchers soon noticed troubling inconsistencies. The times of the conversations did not perfectly match Luke's estimated time of death, leaving small gaps that Ryan could not satisfactorily explain. In addition, some of the usernames involved in the games were secondary or anonymous accounts, making it difficult to verify the real identity of those participating. Ryan was an ambitious young man, but also deeply insecure, and those insecurities seemed to guide many of his decisions. His obsession with matching Luke had led him to behave in ways that, while not necessarily criminal, were questionable. For example, he would often review Luke's projects without permission, looking for errors or details that he could use to discredit him to his superiors. He had also developed a habit of storing confidential information on his personal computer, something that could be interpreted as a way of protecting himself in case of future conflicts. However, this practice raised suspicions among investigators, who began to wonder if Ryan had crossed even more dangerous boundaries. During the questioning, Ryan tried to maintain his composure, but it was obvious that he was nervous. His answers were clear and well-structured, but also overly rehearsed, as if he had spent time preparing for this moment. He avoided looking directly into the investigator's eyes, choosing instead to fix his attention on some undefined spot on the table in front of him. When asked about his relationship with Luke, Ryan adopted a defensive tone, insisting that any conflict between them was strictly professional and that he had no reason to wish him any harm. However, his words lacked emotional authenticity. He seemed to be reciting a carefully constructed narrative rather than expressing true emotions. What struck investigators most was the intensity with which Ryan defended his innocence. Instead of showing genuine regret for Luke's death, his focus was entirely on disassociating himself from the crime. He seemed more concerned with protecting his reputation than understanding what had really happened. This attitude, combined with the inconsistencies in his alibi and his history of conflict with Luke, made Ryan one of the prime suspects. As the investigation progressed, the detectives began to piece together a fuller picture of who Ryan Miller was. A talented but deeply insecure young man, caught in a web of jealousy and resentment that may have led him to make impulsive and dangerous decisions. Although Ryan continued to deny any involvement in the crime, investigators knew there were still many pieces to fit together. The gaps in his alibi, coupled with his evasive behavior during interrogation, suggested that he was hiding something important. He may not have been guilty of the murder, but it was clear that he was keeping secrets that could shed light on what happened that fateful night. The case was far from solved, and Ryan Miller remained a central figure in the puzzle the detectives were trying to solve. Daniel Kim, 35, was a prominent figure in the technology investment world, known for his ability to identify emerging opportunities and transform them into successful companies. Daniel had built a financial empire ranging from innovative startups to established Silicon Valley projects. His charisma and business acumen had made him a respected and feared name in the industry. However, behind that facade of success and sophistication, there was a web of questionable decisions and opaque financial practices that Daniel strove to keep hidden. He was a man accustomed to moving in the shadows, always seeking to protect his interests, even if that meant crossing ethical boundaries. One of the companies associated with Daniel had direct links to Luke Henry, the programmer specializing in cryptocurrency security, whose death had shaken the technology community. Luke, in his eagerness to ensure transparency in digital systems, had discovered significant irregularities in the finances of one of the companies funded by Daniel. These anomalies suggested not only mismanagement of funds, but also possible fraudulent activities that could have compromised Daniel's reputation and, more importantly, his fortune. When Luke threatened to go public with his findings, Daniel knew he faced a potentially devastating crisis. For him, the idea that anyone could expose his darkest secrets was unacceptable, especially when both his career and his legacy were at stake. The night Luke was found dead, Daniel claimed to have attended an evening meeting with other businessmen in San Francisco. According to his account, he had spent several hours discussing investment strategies and reviewing proposals with high-profile colleagues. Witnesses corroborated his presence there, confirming that Daniel had been active for much of the event. However, investigators soon noticed temporary gaps in his itinerary. Although Daniel had arrived at the meeting site on time, some records showed that he had left the building for a brief period without clear explanation. This gap, though small, raised uncomfortable questions. Where had he been during those minutes? Had he had enough time to engage in something more sinister? During the interrogation, Daniel projected an image of calm and confidence, as if he was used to dealing with high-pressure situations. Dressed impeccably and with a firm but friendly tone of voice, he answered each question with precision, as if he had anticipated every line of inquiry. However, there were times when his composure seemed to waver slightly. His hands, normally relaxed on the table, moved almost imperceptibly when asked for specific details about his whereabouts during critical hours. He also avoided looking directly at the investigators when they touched on issues related to Luke or the financial irregularities uncovered at his company. Subtle but revealing details. What intrigued the investigators most was the way Daniel tried to disassociate himself emotionally from the case. He spoke of Luke with calculated coolness, describing him as a talented but troubled collaborator, whose actions he claimed were impulsive and irresponsible. He showed not a hint of regret for Luke's death, focusing his speech on how the situation could negatively affect the companies involved. This lack of empathy, combined with his insistence on defending his innocence, raised additional doubts. Was it possible that Daniel was so concerned about protecting his reputation that he would have taken drastic measures to silence Luke? Detectives knew that men like Daniel, with unlimited resources and powerful connections, could manipulate circumstances to their advantage. but they also left traces that, with patience, could be uncovered. Daniel Kim was an ambitious, determined, and extremely intelligent man, but also someone willing to sacrifice ethical principles in the name of professional survival. The financial irregularities Luke had uncovered were no accident. They were part of a larger pattern that Daniel had used to maximize his profits while minimizing risks. The threat of public exposure posed an existential danger to him, and although there was no conclusive evidence of his involvement in the crime, it was clear that he had much to lose if the truth came out. The gaps in his itinerary, coupled with his behavior during interrogation, meant that Daniel remained in the investigators' sights. Every detail, no matter how small, was carefully scrutinized for inconsistencies. Although Daniel continued to deny any connection to the murder, detectives knew that there were still many pieces to fit together. Daniel Kim, with his history of power and secrets, remained a central figure in the puzzle that was leading them to the truth. And the deeper they delved into his life, the clearer it became that the case was not only a criminal mystery, but also an exploration of the shadows that lurk behind the glitter of success. The truth about Luke Henry's death finally emerged after a painstaking investigation that unraveled the dark secrets hidden at the heart of the case. The USB drive found at the crime scene turned out to be the key piece connecting all the clues. The encrypted files contained on it were decrypted using the password hastily scrawled in Luke's notebook, Limit 42. Within those files, investigators discovered compromising emails that exposed a web of manipulation and blackmail orchestrated by Clara Logan. The messages revealed how Clara had previously attempted to silence Luke, pressuring him to abandon his investigations into fraudulent activities within Quantum Crypt. However, Luke refused to budge, prompting Clara to take more extreme measures. The forensic analysis also yielded a crucial discovery. DNA samples found under Luke's fingernails matched those taken from Clara during a routine interrogation. This finding confirmed that there had been a physical struggle between them prior to her death. Reconstruction of the crime indicated that Clara had entered Luke's apartment using a set of keys she had previously obtained through her position within the company. Her initial goal was to steal the USB, eliminating any evidence that could incriminate her or Quantum Crypt. However, when Luke caught her red-handed, the situation escalated quickly. Confronted by her colleague, Clara lost control. In the midst of the confusion and adrenaline, she accidentally struck Luke, causing a fatal injury that ended his life. Once the act was consummated, Clara knew she had to cover it up to avoid being linked to the crime. Using her knowledge of Luke's personal habits, she faked an accidental overdose. She knew he occasionally took sleeping medication due to the stress of his job, so she leveraged this information to construct a false narrative. She administered a combination of powerful sedatives mixed with alcohol, making sure it appeared that Luke had voluntarily lost control. He then placed the empty bottle of pills and the bottle of whiskey near his body, creating the illusion of a self-inflicted death. Every detail was calculated to divert any suspicion to a personal tragedy rather than a premeditated murder. Luke's damaged cell phone also played a key role in the investigation. Although Clara had thrown it against the wall to destroy it, forensic experts managed to recover deleted messages that directly implicated Clara in illegal activities within Quantum Crypt. These messages not only confirmed her involvement in covering up fraudulent transactions, but also showed that she had been monitoring Luke for weeks prior to his death. It was clear that Clara had planned every step carefully, but underestimated the investigators' ability to reconstruct the events accurately. Finally, the word blockchain noted in Luke's notebook led detectives to the companies involved in the fraudulent scheme. This lead connected all the suspects, from Clara to other key players within Quantum Crypt, establishing clear links between the corrupt activities and the events that led to Luke's death. Under the accumulating pressure of irrefutable evidence, Clara finally confessed her guilt. She acknowledged that she had gone to Luke's apartment with the intention of stealing the USB, but claimed that his death was an accident, the result of an unexpected struggle. However, her attempt to cover up the crime and feign an overdose made it clear that she was willing to do anything to protect her reputation and that of the company. The resolution of the case not only exposed the truth behind Luke's death, but also revealed the darkness that can hide behind the glitter of technological innovation. Clara Logan, once admired for her ambition and leadership, was exposed as someone willing to cross unsuspected moral boundaries. Her story served as a grim reminder of how power and greed can corrupt even those who seem to have it all under control. Clara Logan's trial became a media spectacle that attracted attention from Silicon Valley and beyond. In court, prosecutors presented a mountain of irrefutable evidence: the compromising emails recovered from the USB, the DNA analysis under Luke's fingernails, the deleted messages from the damaged phone, and his partial confession. Each piece constructed a clear and unrelenting narrative of premeditation and cover-up. The defense argued that Luke's death was accidental, and that Clara acted under intense work pressure, trying to protect her career and Quantum Crypt's reputation. However, these justifications barely resonated in the courtroom. Clara, dressed in impeccable suits, maintained a serene expression, but her eyes revealed the tension of someone who knew the verdict would be unfavorable. Witnesses from the company and Luke's close colleagues testified about the toxic environment at Quantum Crypt and how Clara had prioritized her ambitions over ethics. In the end, the jury was quick to render its decision: guilty of first-degree murder and obstruction of justice. Sentenced to life imprisonment, Clara listened to the verdict coolly, as if she had already accepted her fate. The case left an indelible mark on the technology industry, serving as a warning about the dangers of allowing ambition to overshadow morality. For many, Luke Henry stood as a reminder of the importance of protecting the truth, even when it costs too much to face it. Case 4. In the vibrant city of Seattle, known as the Emerald City, a dark shadow began to spread across the gleaming skyscrapers and bustling streets. A series of unnerving murders shook the tech community to its core, leaving behind a blanket of fear that stretched far beyond the South Lake Union neighborhood. This area, famous for its modernity and for being home to innovations that were changing the world, had now become the scene of unfathomable horror. Here, amidst the opulence and dynamism, two brilliant minds were found dead under circumstances as disturbing as they were inexplicable. The first crime occurred in a minimalist apartment, where every detail seemed to have been designed with surgical precision. The victim was found sitting in an armchair in front of a panoramic window that offered breathtaking views of the city skyline. Her expression was serene, almost peaceful, as if she had simply fallen asleep while gazing at the skyline. However, the reality was much more sinister. There were no signs of physical violence, no visible wounds, no marks of struggle. Everything was in order, too much in order. But on the opposite wall, painted with meticulous precision in a bright golden hue, was an intricate Celtic knot, an ancient symbol, laden with deep meanings traditionally associated with protection and destiny. That detail, seemingly out of place in such a contemporary setting, sent shivers down the spine of all who saw it. It was as if someone had wanted to leave a message, a macabre signature connecting this case to something much bigger. The second crime followed a disturbingly similar pattern. The second victim was found in her luxury apartment, lying on her king-size bed covered by a silk blanket that appeared to have been delicately placed. As in the first case, there were no signs of violence, no disarray, and nothing to suggest a struggle. However, on the mirror of her dressing table, engraved with a sharp object, appeared the same Celtic knot. This time, however, the symbol had not been painted, but carved directly into the glass. It was a cold and deliberate reminder that whoever was behind these crimes knew exactly what they were doing. The common details between the two scenarios were impossible to ignore: a half-empty wine glass, traces of incense ash in an aromatherapy burner, and an open book on a nearby table. Little clues that seemed carefully arranged to convey something, though no one could decipher what. When forensic analysis revealed that both bodies contained traces of an unknown substance in their bloodstream, it became clear that the killer had used some kind of poison or toxin to end their lives. The method chosen was as subtle as it was lethal, designed to leave no visible trace until it was too late. The absence of physical violence and the meticulousness with which the crime scenes had been prepared suggested that the perpetrator was not only intelligent, but also possessed a thorough knowledge of chemistry and psychology. Every detail, from the position of the bodies to the choice of the Celtic knot, seemed to be imbued with a dark and intentional purpose. It was as if the killer wanted to communicate something beyond the act itself, something no one yet understood. It was then that the detective in charge of the investigation entered the scene, a figure that quickly captured everyone's attention. Detective Marcus Hale was known in the police department as the Architect, not because he had a background in construction, but because his mind worked like a perfectly geared machine, capable of assembling the smallest and most scattered pieces of a jigsaw puzzle into a complete picture. With more than 20 years of experience in complex cases, Hale had a legendary reputation. He was meticulous, patient, and possessed an almost supernatural ability to read between the lines. His keen eyes and calm demeanor inspired confidence, but also reverential respect. No one wanted to be the target of his scrutiny, because when Hale set his eyes on something, he would not rest until he unraveled the truth. Hale arrived at the scene of the second crime with his characteristic calm, observing every detail with almost hypnotic attention. While other detectives were frantically moving about, taking notes and discussing theories, he remained silent, absorbing everything around him. He was the first to notice the connection between the two crimes, not only in terms of modus operandi, but also in the symbolism of the Celtic knot. To Hale, that symbol was not simply a signature, it was a statement, something the killer wanted the world to understand, although it was not yet clear what it meant. The pressure on the detective grew as the media began to speculate about the crimes. Alarmist headlines filled the front pages of newspapers, and social networks exploded with conspiracy theories and unfounded rumors. The tech community, which had always considered itself invulnerable inside its glass and steel towers, now trembled at the possibility that no one was safe. Amid the chaos, Hale remained unperturbed. He knew that the key to solving the case lay not in the external noise, but in the quiet details that others might overlook. With each step of the investigation, Detective Hale delved deeper into the maze of clues the killer had left behind. He was aware that he was up against someone extremely intelligent, someone who enjoyed playing with expectations and manipulating the emotions of those who tried to understand him. But Hale also knew something the killer was unaware of, that even the most carefully laid plans have cracks, and that those cracks eventually lead to the truth. And so, with relentless determination, the detective began to weave his own web, ready to catch the man responsible for those chilling crimes. Evelyn Carter, 34, was a woman whose life seemed woven with the threads of success and ambition. As director of innovation at a leading artificial intelligence company, her name resonated in the most exclusive technology circles. Her ability to lead innovative teams had not only made her a respected figure, but also a beacon of inspiration for many young professionals. Despite her tireless dedication to her work, Evelyn maintained deep and genuine ties to her family. Single and childless, she had built an especially close relationship with her younger sister Emma, who always admired her strength and determination. Her parents, living in Portland, were her emotional refuge, although the demands of her career often limited their visits. However, the luster of her career was not without its shadows. Recently, Evelyn had been the target of anonymous threats related to a controversial patent she developed to automate industrial processes. This breakthrough, which promised to revolutionize entire industries, also aroused misgivings and resistance among those who feared its implications. Despite this, Evelyn faced every challenge with the same serenity and confidence that characterized her. Her legacy was undeniable, a brilliant mind that left its mark on the world of technology. However, her sudden departure left a void that was impossible to fill, both in her personal environment and in the professional community that so admired her talent. Ryan Mitchell, 41, was a man whose life revolved around ambition and innovation. As the founder and CEO of a software company specializing in cybersecurity, his name had become synonymous with futuristic vision and business success. Ryan had a knack for anticipating market needs, creating solutions that others could barely imagine. Yet his professional brilliance was tinged with a controversial reputation. He was known for being ruthless in business, willing to make tough decisions in order to maintain his position at the top. Throughout his career, he faced several lawsuits related to unethical labor practices, although nothing was ever proven against him. These accusations only added to the aura of mystery surrounding him. In his personal life, Ryan was burdened by a complicated relationship with his ex-wife, marked by financial disputes that seemed to have no end. Divorced and the father of 2 teenage children, his bond with them was fragile, affected by the emotional distance that his absolute dedication to work had imposed. Despite his professional accomplishments, Ryan was a deeply lonely man, caught between the legacy he wanted to build and the consequences of his choices. His departure left a void in the business world, but also a reminder of the complexities that hid his seemingly successful life. With the clues accumulating and the threads of the investigation converging, Detective Marcus Hale decided it was time to delve deeper into the testimonies of those who might be linked to the case. Each suspect held a piece of the puzzle, and through interrogation Hale hoped to reveal hidden truths. With methodical calm, he prepared to face contradictory versions, tense emotions, and fragile alibis, knowing that in these conversations lay the key to unraveling the mystery of the Celtic knot. Alex Turner, 29, was a figure who attracted attention for his unpredictable energy and volatile temperament. From a young age, he had always displayed a blend of talent and impulsiveness that made him stand out for both his accomplishments and his conflicts. During his time at the artificial intelligence company run by Evelyn Carter, Alex had been a promising employee, full of innovative ideas that seemed ahead of his time. However, his confrontational behavior at work soon began to overshadow his potential. Frequent arguments with colleagues, his lack of ability to work as part of a team, and his tendency to make hasty decisions caused his relationship with management to deteriorate rapidly. Finally, the day came when he was fired, an event that marked a turning point in his life. The official reason for his dismissal was a serious accusation. Alex claimed that Evelyn Carter, his direct boss, had plagiarized a key idea that he had presented during his time at the company. According to his version, that idea had the potential to revolutionize an important sector within the technology industry. But instead of receiving credit, he saw Evelyn adopt it as her own and take it to success without acknowledging his contribution. For Alex, this act not only meant the end of his professional career, but also a personal betrayal that he could never overcome. His resentment towards Evelyn grew over time, becoming an obsession that slowly consumed him. Although he had no hard evidence to back up his accusations, his conviction that she had ruined his future was absolute. When the murders began to rock Seattle's tech community, Alex Turner quickly came to the attention of authorities because of his background and his direct link to the first victim, Evelyn Carter. During questioning, Alex was nervous but cooperative, answering questions with a mixture of indignation and frustration. He claimed to be at a local bar watching a soccer game on the night of the first murder. Several people confirmed seeing him there, which seemed to provide him with a solid alibi for that particular crime. However, as the investigations progressed and the second murder was uncovered, a troubling gap in his testimony emerged. Alex was unable to provide a clear explanation for his whereabouts during the night Ryan Mitchell was found dead. This inconsistency raised significant doubts about his possible involvement in the crimes. Despite his apparent innocence in the first case, Alex could not avoid being haunted by his past. His impulsive behavior and history of work conflicts made him a complex character, whose life was marked by cycles of ambition and self-destruction. Many of his former colleagues described Alex as extremely intelligent, but also immature and prone to overreact to any setback. His obsession with Evelyn Carter seemed to be the turning point that defined his professional and personal decline. Those who knew him well knew that Alex harbored deep resentment toward those he held responsible for his failures, and Evelyn was at the top of that list. During the investigations, the detectives delved deeper into Alex's life, looking for connections beyond his dispute with Evelyn. They discovered that, following his dismissal, Alex had attempted to launch several business ventures on his own, but none had prospered. His efforts were consistently rebuffed by investors or undermined by his own inability to work with others. This pattern of failures only further fueled his bitterness, leading him to blame Evelyn not only for his dismissal, but for everything that had gone wrong in his life since then. To Alex, she wasn't just a former boss. She was the symbol of all the opportunities he felt had been unfairly taken away from him. However, as the evidence accumulated, it became clear that Alex was not the only suspect in the case. Although his bond with Evelyn and his troubling behavior placed him under the spotlight, there was no direct evidence connecting him to the crimes. His alibi for the first murder, corroborated by multiple witnesses, remained solid, and although his whereabouts during the second crime were uncertain, this was not enough to incriminate him. The detectives knew they needed more than mere coincidences to link him to the murders. Meanwhile, Alex continued to defend his innocence, insisting that his only motivation was to clear his name and prove that Evelyn had made a grave mistake in firing him. 36-year-old Claire River was a woman whose presence always left an impression. Known in business circles for her cunning and ability to manipulate situations to her advantage, Claire had built a reputation that inspired both admiration and wariness. As Ryan Mitchell's business partner, their professional relationship was characterized by a mix of strategic collaboration and occasional tension. She was a smart, calculating, and extremely ambitious woman, qualities that had brought her to prominence in the competitive world of technology. Behind that facade of impeccable success, however, There were shadows that began to emerge with the murders that rocked Seattle's tech community. The legal dispute between Claire and Ryan over ownership of certain company assets was one of the most problematic aspects of their relationship. Negotiations between the two had become increasingly tense in the months leading up to the crimes, with cross-accusations and lawsuits threatening to destabilize the very structure of the company. To many, this dispute appeared to be the epicenter of a much deeper conflict, one that went beyond simple financial interests. Rumors of a secret romantic relationship between the two added another layer of complexity to the case. According to speculation, Claire and Ryan had maintained an intimate bond that ended abruptly, leaving resentments and emotional wounds that were never healed. This explosive mix of business and emotions made Claire a central figure in the investigation. When it came time to be questioned, Claire demonstrated an unwavering calm, as if she had anticipated every question and prepared her answers with surgical precision. She claimed that on the night of the second murder, she was at a conference in San Francisco, an event that several colleagues confirmed witnessing. Her alibi for that crime seemed solid, backed up by multiple witnesses and records of participation in the event. However, when detectives inquired about her whereabouts during the first murder, her version became less clear. Claire admitted that she did not have a strong alibi for that night, although she insisted that she had been working from home reviewing documents related to the legal dispute. This inconsistency raised significant doubts about her possible involvement in the crimes. Claire was a woman who knew how to navigate in the most hostile environments, using her charisma and social skills to win allies and neutralize adversaries. Many who knew her well described Claire as someone who always had a plan, someone who anticipated the moves of others before they made them. Her ability to manipulate situations to her advantage had not only made her a formidable negotiator but also a feared figure in business circles. However, this same ability raised suspicions in the context of the murders. Had she used her cunning to plan something much darker? Or was she simply a victim of circumstances that placed her in the wrong place at the wrong time? Claire's personal life was a maze of secrets and contradictions. Although she projected an image of independence and strength, those close to her knew she harbored a vulnerable side, especially when it came to her relationship with Ryan. The breakup of their romantic bond had left deep emotional scars, according to some close friends. Claire never spoke openly about it, but her behavior in the months that followed revealed signs of frustration and pain. Some even suggested that her obsession with winning the legal dispute with Ryan had emotional roots beyond the purely financial. For Claire, this battle was not just about corporate assets. It was a form of personal revenge, an attempt to regain the control she felt she had lost. As the detectives delved deeper into his life, they discovered that Claire had access to inside information about Ryan and his daily routine. Her role as a business partner allowed her to move within the inner circles of the company, which could have provided her with the tools necessary to plan something as meticulous as the murders. However, there was no direct evidence connecting Claire to the crimes. Her alibi for the second murder remained solid, and while her whereabouts during the first were uncertain, this was not enough to incriminate her. Investigators knew they needed more than mere coincidence or speculation to definitively link her to the case. Marcus Reed, 45, was a man whose presence inspired both admiration and distrust. In the competitive world of technology, his name evoked a mixture of respect and fear. Marcus was known for being cold, calculating, and extremely efficient in his strategic moves. As Ryan Mitchell's direct competitor in the technology market, he had built his empire on ruthless decisions and tactics that often bordered on the ethical. He was a player who did not hesitate to sabotage rival projects if it meant consolidating his position at the top. His reputation preceded him. Marcus Reed was not one to leave loose ends or missed opportunities. His every step was meticulously planned, as if each move was part of a chessboard where he was always trying to stay ahead of his opponents. The professional relationship between Marcus and Ryan was a history of rivalry, marked by constant tensions. Ryan's innovations, along with the technological breakthroughs developed by Evelyn Carter, had cost Marcus major contracts. These failures represented not only financial losses for his company, but also significant blows to his ego and prestige in the industry. To Marcus, Ryan and Evelyn were not just competitors. They were obstacles blocking his path to market dominance. His obsession with eliminating any threat to his success had, in the past, led him to take extreme measures to destabilize his rivals. Although nothing could ever be proven against him, suspicions about his involvement in unethical practices were always present. This history meant that his name inevitably appeared on the list of suspects when murders began to rock Seattle's tech community. When the detectives called Marcus in for questioning, his attitude was unusually restrained. He showed no signs of nervousness or uncertainty, but rather an icy calm that seemed to calculate every word before uttering it. Marcus claimed that on the night of both crimes he had been working from home, reviewing documents and preparing strategies for upcoming projects. However, he lacked witnesses who could back up his version. This lack of a solid alibi placed him in a vulnerable position in the investigation. The detectives noted that while his statement was plausible, it was also impossible to verify, raising questions about the true nature of his whereabouts during those fateful nights. Was he simply a man accustomed to working in solitude, or was he taking advantage of that privacy to carry out something much darker? Marcus Reed was a man who lived for control. From a young age, he had demonstrated an innate ability to anticipate the actions of others and manipulate situations to his advantage. This ability had made him a successful businessman, but it had also shaped his personality in ways that isolated him emotionally. Marcus had no close friends or deep personal relationships. His life revolved around his company, his goals, and his insatiable ambition. Those who worked with him described him as a demanding and uncompromising leader, someone who tolerated no mistakes or weaknesses. His coldness was both a strength and a weakness, making him impenetrable but also aloof. In the context of the murders, this characteristic made him even more suspicious. A man as calculating as Marcus could have planned the crimes with surgical precision, eliminating any traces that could link him directly to the events. However, beyond his cold demeanor and aggressive business tactics, there was something about Marcus that aroused curiosity. His obsession with defeating Ryan and Evelyn seemed to go beyond simple financial interests. To Marcus, these two individuals represented a personal challenge, a barrier that prevented his legacy from being absolute. The loss of major contracts not only affected his bank account, it undermined his identity as the undisputed leader in the industry. In his mind, eliminating those he held responsible for his decline could be seen as a way to restore balance, to ensure that no one would ever stand in his way again. This mentality, combined with his history of sabotage and his lack of an alibi, made him a difficult suspect to ignore. As the detectives delved deeper into the investigation, they began to analyze the most intimate details of Marcus's life. They discovered that he had access to privileged information about Ryan and Evelyn's activities, thanks to his network of contacts and his ability to infiltrate the most exclusive circles in the industry. In addition, his knowledge of his competitors' weaknesses made him capable of exploiting any vulnerabilities he could find. However, there was no direct evidence connecting Marcus to the crimes. His claim to have worked from home while weak could not be disproved without hard evidence. Investigators knew they needed more than speculation to definitively link him to the case. Dr. Nathan Cole, 50, was a man whose reputation in the field of organic chemistry and natural toxins had been the subject of both admiration and controversy. For decades, Nathan had been noted for his ability to unravel the mysteries of complex chemical compounds, becoming a respected figure within academic and corporate circles. However, his professional career was marked by a series of successes punctuated by equally notorious failures. Although he possessed a prodigious intellect, Nathan was also known for his eccentric nature and his tendency to prioritize his own interests over the goals of those who hired him. This combination of genius and self-centeredness had led him to cross ethical boundaries on more than one occasion, something that would eventually cost him dearly. Dr. Cole's relationship with Evelyn began with a promise of innovation. Hired as an independent researcher, he was tasked with developing new technologies that could revolutionize the industry. However, shortly after starting the project, Evelyn discovered disturbing irregularities in his research. Some of the data presented by Nathan did not match the expected results, and certain experiments seemed to have been deliberately manipulated to hide errors or, worse, to justify inappropriate methods. When Evelyn confronted Dr. Cole, he attempted to minimize the accusations, arguing that delays and discrepancies were part of the scientific process. However, Evelyn was unwilling to tolerate such practices and decided to abruptly cancel her contract. This was a blow to Nathan, both professionally and personally, as he felt that his talent had been misunderstood or underestimated. After being fired by Evelyn, Nathan found temporary refuge with another employer, Ryan Miller. The latter, seeking to leverage Dr. Cole's prestige, hired him to work on an ambitious project related to cryptocurrency security. However, it quickly became clear that Nathan did not meet Ryan's expectations. His chaotic working style and lack of attention to practical details made his contributions insufficient and inconsistent. In addition, Nathan seemed more interested in experimenting with natural toxins than actively collaborating with Ryan's team. After several months of mutual frustration, Ryan decided to terminate his association with Dr. Cole, leaving him once again unemployed and mired in a growing sense of rejection and resentment. When questioned in connection with the crimes, Nathan claimed to have been conducting experiments in his private laboratory during key moments involved in the investigations. According to him, his time was consumed by personal projects that he considered crucial to advancing his field. However, he lacked a solid alibi for any of the events in question. There were no witnesses who could confirm his presence in the lab and no conclusive records to back up his claims. This raised uncomfortable questions for investigators, who began to analyze whether Nathan might have been directly involved in the murders. His expertise in natural toxins in particular caught the attention of detectives, who wondered if his specialized knowledge could have been used to commit the crimes. During the interrogation, Nathan adopted a defensive but apparently calm demeanor. Dressed in a wrinkled lab coat and wearing slightly crooked glasses, he projected the image of a distracted scientist deep in thought. However, behind that facade of indifference, there were flashes of tension that he could not completely disguise. His hands trembled subtly as he organized papers on the table, and his answers to the most incisive questions tended to be evasive or overly technical, as if he were trying to divert attention to irrelevant details. When asked about his relationships with Evelyn and Ryan, Nathan adopted a bitter tone, blaming them both for not understanding his vision and sabotaging his career. Although he denied any involvement in the crimes, his resentment toward those who had fired him was palpable. What intrigued the researchers most was the duality in Nathan's personality. On the one hand, he was a brilliant scientist, capable of mastering areas of knowledge that very few people understood. On the other, he was deeply troubled, whose obsession with his work had led him to isolate himself socially and make questionable decisions. In his private laboratory, detectives found an impressive collection of specialized chemicals and equipment, some of them related to potentially lethal natural toxins. Although Nathan claimed these materials were part of his legitimate research, investigators could not ignore the possibility that they had been used for less noble purposes. Each labeled vial, each notebook filled with scribbled notes seemed to tell a different story. A narrative Nathan was unwilling to share openly. The resolution of the case came when the detectives discovered that Dr. Nathan Cole had been deeply affected by his relationship with Evelyn Carter and Ryan Mitchell, who had dismissed his work and sidelined him at crucial points in his career. Evelyn, who had hired him to develop innovative technologies, ended up abruptly terminating his contract after discovering irregularities in his research. For Nathan, this decision was not only a professional dismissal, but a public humiliation that called into question his reputation as a scientist. He firmly believed that his ideas would revolutionize industrial automation, but Evelyn invalidated him, sidelining him as if he were expendable. This betrayal left a deep emotional scar, fueling his resentment. When Ryan Mitchell subsequently hired him, Nathan saw an opportunity to redeem himself. However, his meticulous, obsessive style did not align with Ryan's practical expectations, leading to another devastating dismissal. For Nathan, this second rejection confirmed his worst fears. The world did not value his genius. In his distorted mind, Evelyn and Ryan were not innocent victims, but responsible for his professional decline. Eliminating them was not just revenge. It was a way to restore the balance he felt was broken. His belief in fate and his fascination with the Celtic knot symbolized his vision of an inevitable cosmic adjustment, a correction he orchestrated. His use of undetectable toxins demonstrated his intellectual arrogance and his desire to leave an indelible mark. Although he attempted to deflect attention to others, the forensic evidence in his final confession revealed the truth. During the trial, the evidence presented, including handwritten notes and chemical compounds acquired by Nathan, sealed his guilt. The jury found him guilty of 2 counts of premeditated murder. Sentenced to life imprisonment, Doctor. Cole listened to the verdict coolly as Seattle found relief after months of terror. The trial of Dr. Nathan Cole was an event that captured the attention of all of Seattle. In court, prosecutors presented compelling evidence: toxins in the victim's bloodstreams, handwritten notes in the book, and records of chemical compound purchases. Although his defense argued that he was a misunderstood scientist, the earlier confessions sealed his fate. The jury deliberated for hours before convicting him of 2 counts of premeditated murder. With a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, Dr. Cole listened to the verdict with the same coolness that had always characterized him, as the city finally found peace after months of terror. Case 5. The city of Salem, Massachusetts carries in its DNA the shadow of a dark past. Its cobblestone streets and colonial houses hold stories of witchcraft trials, cries of innocence drowned out by religious fervor, and mysteries that never found answers. For centuries, Salem has been a place where the supernatural intertwines with the everyday, where tourists look for ghosts on every corner and occult stores thrive as if they were bakeries. But this time, something different happened under the silvery light of the full moon, something even the most superstitious locals could not have imagined. It was a piercing scream that broke the silence of that fateful night. A neighbor, awakened by the sound of rushing footsteps and unintelligible mumbling, called the police at around 2:30 a.m. The scene officers, discovered inside an old Victorian house on the outskirts of town, seemed straight out of a Gothic nightmare. In the center of the room, dimly lit by the faint light of nearly burnt-out black candles, lay the lifeless body of Alistair Finch, his skin marked with strange symbols, etched with surgical precision using what appeared to be a ritual knife. The strokes were intricate, as if drawn by a hand that knew well the meaning of every curve and line. Around him, ceremonial objects formed a perfect circle. A small cauldron filled with still smoldering ashes, charred bones, scattered black feathers, and an ancient grimoire open on a makeshift stand. The yellowed pages of the book were covered in archaic writing, but one page in particular was marked with a jeweled dagger. Red curtains covered all the windows, blocking out any trace of outside light, while the pungent aroma of incense saturated the air, leaving an oppressive feeling that made it difficult to breathe. The brutal murder not only baffled those first on the scene, it also sent ripples of panic through the entire community. Was this the work of some secret cult, a ritualistic act motivated by ancient beliefs, or perhaps something far more humane disguised as dark magic? The truth is that no one could explain how or why someone would have carried out such an atrocity against one of the city's most beloved intellectuals. And even less so during a night as charged with symbolism as that one, when the full moon painted the night sky with a silvery halo that seemed to observe everything from above. Into the midst of this chaos came Detective Karen Clark, a 35-year-old woman with a scalpel-sharp analytical mind. Born and raised in Boston, Karen had built her career on facts, evidence, and relentless logic. She did not believe in spirits or curses, and had always rejected conspiracy theories that mixed reality and mythology. However, after being transferred to Salem due to budget cuts at her previous precinct, she soon realized that this case would be unlike any other she had faced before. From the moment she crossed the threshold of that Victorian house, she sensed that something didn't fit. There was something in the atmosphere, in the way the objects were arranged, in the symbols drawn on the victim's body, that caused him a visceral discomfort. It was as if the scene itself was trying to tell her a story, but in a language she did not yet understand. Karen knew she would have to navigate between 2 worlds, that of the superstitious inhabitants who saw witches in every shadow, and the stark reality that demanded tangible answers. As she pored over the crime scene, she noticed details that others might have overlooked. Partial footprints in the dust on the floor, fibers attached to the grimoire, remnants of melted wax that still bore finger marks. Each fragment was a loose thread in a complex tapestry, and Karen was determined to unravel it, even if it meant wandering into uncharted territory. Salem began to reveal her secrets, some darker than others. But what Karen didn't know then was that solving this case would test not only her professional skills, but also her ability to confront questions that might not have clear answers. Because in Salem, the line between the real and the unreal has always been thin and dangerously blurry. Alistair Finch, a 47-year-old man, devoted much of his life to the study of the folklore and dark history that defined Salem, Massachusetts. As a professor at Salem College, he was noted for his deep interest in the legends and rituals associated with witchcraft, a fascination that led him to write several books on the subject. Alistair possessed a unique ability to weave stories that transported the reader back in time, but he was also the subject of controversy. Some accused him of exploiting local culture for personal gain and recognition, while others admired his tireless dedication and deep knowledge. Divorced and childless, Alistair lived alone in an imposing Victorian house on the outskirts of Salem. His relationship with Evelyn, his ex-wife, was distant and fraught with unresolved tensions. Despite his professional success, his personal life seemed marked by a palpable loneliness. In his research, he found refuge and purpose, although these same passions made him the target of criticism and rivalry. To some, he was a charlatan seeking fame. To others, a passionate scholar whose work left an indelible mark on the understanding of Salem's shadowy history. Detective Karen Clark knew that each suspect hid a piece of the puzzle, so she decided to approach the interrogations with surgical precision. With a notebook in hand and an inquisitive gaze, she prepared the environment to listen to versions, unravel contradictions, and look for details that could go unnoticed. It was time to confront those possibly involved, analyze their alibis, and discover what secrets lay behind their carefully measured words. The clock was ticking, and every second counted in the search for the truth. Evelyn Finch, 45, is a meticulous and reserved woman whose life seems to have been marked by the shadow of her marital past. She works as a librarian in Boston, a profession that reflects her orderly nature and her love of quiet knowledge. However, beneath that calm appearance, she hides a woman deeply affected by years of cohabitation with Alistair Finch, her ex-husband. Their divorce, which occurred 5 years ago, did not bring the peace Evelyn had hoped for. On the contrary, the relationship between the two continued to be strained, plagued by mutual accusations and accumulated resentments. It was rumored that Alistair owed her a considerable sum of money, proceeds from the sale of the family home, a matter that was never fully resolved. This financial disagreement not only exacerbated tensions between them, but also fueled old emotional wounds. The possibility that Evelyn had motive for committing the crime did not go unnoticed by Detective Karen Clark. During questioning, Evelyn seemed controlled, almost too composed, but her eyes revealed a mixture of pain and barely contained frustration. She might have wanted revenge on Alistair for years of emotional and financial mistreatment, a weight she had carried on her shoulders for a long time. The money outstanding between them was more than just a debt. It symbolized all the broken promises, the endless arguments, and the feeling of having been used and abandoned. For someone like Evelyn, who valued stability and fairness, this situation probably felt like a constant affront. And while she claimed to be focused on rebuilding her life after the divorce, it wasn't hard to imagine how pent-up rage could have found a violent outlet. When questioned about her whereabouts on the night of the crime, Evelyn claimed that she had been working late at the library. 2 colleagues confirmed seeing her there going through documents and organizing shelves, which seemed to corroborate her initial account. However, no one could back up her whereabouts after 10 p.m., just when the murder is estimated to have occurred. That window of time, though brief, left room for doubt. Had she had enough time to travel from Boston to Salem, commit the crime, and return undetected? It was a long shot, but not impossible. Besides, Evelyn was well acquainted with Alistair's habits, his schedule, and daily routine. If she had planned anything, she would have known exactly when and how to act. The interrogation also revealed small details that caused Detective Clark to keep Evelyn on her list of suspects. For example, Evelyn avoided mentioning her last encounter with Alistair, a tense conversation that several witnesses witnessed weeks before the murder. On that occasion, Alistair had publicly implied that Evelyn was exaggerating the debt and had no intention of paying it off soon. The harsh words echoed in the air, making it clear that the conflict between the two was far from resolved. Although Evelyn tried to minimize the importance of that confrontation during the interrogation, her body language and tone of voice suggested otherwise. There was something about her that didn't quite fit, something that Detective Clark could not ignore. At the same time, however, Evelyn did not seem to fit the profile of a ritualistic killer at all. Although she had clear motives and access to information about Alistair's life, she lacked the specialized knowledge necessary to carry out such an elaborate crime. The symbols engraved on the victim's body, the precisely arranged ceremonial objects, and the use of an ancient grimoire required a level of understanding that went beyond the basics. Was it possible that Evelyn had collaborated with someone else, someone with knowledge of dark magic and rituals? Or perhaps it was simply another piece of a much more complex puzzle. Detective Clark knew she would need to dig deeper into Evelyn's life before dismissing her completely. For now, she remained an ambiguous figure, caught between the shadow of her past and the uncomfortable questions of the present. Margaret Hawthorne, a 32-year-old woman, carried with her the mysterious and enigmatic aura that many associated with the ancient traditions of Salem. As a practicing witch and leader of the local coven known as the Sisters of the Moon, Margaret had dedicated her life to the study and practice of ancient rituals. Her presence commanded respect, not only because of her natural charisma, but also because of the deep knowledge she possessed of the occult and pagan beliefs. She was seen by her followers as an inspirational figure, someone who defended the spiritual roots of an often misunderstood and stigmatized community. However, behind this image of strength and devotion, there were emotional scars that had shaped her character over the years. Her relationship with Alistair Finch began as cordial, even collaborative. For several years, the two worked together on research related to ancient rituals and esoteric practices. Alistair, fascinated by Salem's dark history, found Margaret an invaluable source of information. She, in turn, confided in him, sharing intimate details about the coven's traditions, something normally reserved only for those initiates in her closest circle. But that trust was broken when Alistair published an article exposing sensitive information about the group's secret practices. For Margaret and the other members of the coven, this was seen as an unforgivable betrayal, a breach of trust that jeopardized not only their safety, but also the integrity of their deepest beliefs. When Detective Karen Clark questioned Margaret about her whereabouts on the night of the murder, she responded calmly but firmly. According to her testimony, she had been holding a private ceremony in the woods with 3 other coven members. The women who accompanied her backed up her version, stating that the ceremony had been planned days in advance and that they all stayed together for hours. However, the lack of physical evidence that could corroborate this alibi left room for doubt. There were no cameras in the forest, no outside witnesses who could confirm their story. Only the testimony of the coven members supported their innocence, which raised inevitable questions about the possibility of a conspiracy among them. Margaret was aware of the weight that rested on her shoulders. As she faced the detective's incisive questions, her gaze reflected a mixture of pride and determination. She seemed unwilling to back down or show weakness to those who questioned her word. To her, the coven was not just a spiritual community. It was her family, her refuge from a world that often scorned or ridiculed her beliefs. Alistair's betrayal had opened a deep wound, one that might never fully heal. And though her testimony seemed sincere, there was something in her attitude that suggested she held more than she was willing to reveal. The connection between Margaret and the crime went beyond mere coincidence. Her advanced knowledge of ancient rituals and her access to ceremonial objects similar to those found at the crime scene made her a key suspect. In addition, her deteriorating relationship with Alistair provided a clear motive: to protect the coven and take revenge on the one who had jeopardized her legacy. However, until hard evidence emerged, all remained speculation. Detective Clark knew she had to follow every lead carefully, seeking to unravel the threads of a case that seemed to weave between the human and the supernatural. Thomas Reed, 28, is an ambitious and passionate young man whose life seems to have revolved around the pursuit of academic validation. An undergraduate student and former top student of Alistair Finch, Thomas had always considered himself one of the professor's favorites. His relationship with Alistair had been close for several years, marked by constant praise and mentorship that nurtured Thomas's intellectual aspirations. However, that idyllic image crumbled recently when their bond took an unexpected turn. A public argument, fraught with tension and hurtful words, erupted after Alistair rejected his thesis on ceremonial magic, calling it unscholarly. For Thomas, that criticism represented not only a blow to his work, but also a public humiliation in front of his peers and colleagues. Alistair's words resonated deeply with him, leaving an emotional scar that may have fueled dark feelings. The possibility that Thomas was acting out of revenge was not lost on Detective Karen Clark. Public humiliation and the desire to prove that his theories were valid could have been motives enough to commit such an extreme act as murder. Thomas had spent months researching obscure rituals to support his thesis, immersing himself in a world of symbolism and ancient practices that many considered fanciful or even dangerous. In the weeks leading up to the crime, it was discovered that he had been consulting websites specializing in occultism and ceremonial magic, acquiring knowledge that could have allowed him to recreate an elaborate ritual like the one found at the crime scene. His obsessive interest in the subject placed him in an uncomfortable position, especially since he appeared to have access to information that matched the details of the murder. When questioned, Thomas claimed that he had spent the entire night of the crime alone in his apartment, studying for an important exam. He spoke with a mixture of nervousness and restrained frustration, trying to remain composed in the face of the detective's questions. However, his alibi lacked witnesses who could back it up. No one could confirm that he had been in his apartment during the key hours, leaving a significant gap in his version of events. This detail, while not conclusive, raised additional suspicions. Had she had enough time to plan and execute such a meticulous crime? Thomas lived only a few miles from Alistair's house, and his prior knowledge of the professor's routine might have made it easier for him to approach without arousing suspicion. The interrogation also revealed small clues that caused Detective Clark to keep Thomas on her list of suspects. For example, his obsession with proving the validity of his thesis seemed to go beyond a simple academic desire. It was as if he needed to prove something deeper, something personal, almost as if he was seeking revenge on those who had underestimated his intelligence. Moreover, his behavior during the interrogation showed signs of anxiety. He avoided looking directly into the detective's eyes and often paused before answering, as if he were carefully measuring each word. These gestures, although subtle, suggested that Thomas was hiding something, although it was not yet clear how relevant it might be. Despite these suspicions, Thomas did not completely fit the profile of a ritualistic killer. Although he had access to information about dark magic, his expertise seemed limited to the theoretical. Performing such a complex crime required not only in-depth knowledge, but also a practical skill that Thomas probably did not possess. However, Detective Clark knew she could not dismiss him so easily. The combination of motive, opportunity, and curiosity for the occult made Thomas a worrisome candidate, someone who needed to be watched more closely. As she reviewed the evidence and analyzed every detail, the detective wondered if Thomas was really guilty or just another victim of circumstance, caught in a web of rumors and coincidences that unfairly pointed to him. Dr. Richard Grayson, a 52-year-old man, had been immersed in academia for decades, where his reputation as a historian had been forged through a combination of investigative rigor and ability to capture the public's attention. The author of several books on Salem's history, Grayson was known for his captivating narrative style, capable of transporting readers back to the city's darkest and most mysterious eras. However, his career was not without its rivalries, and none was as evident as the one he had with Alistair Finch. Both men competed fiercely for media spotlights, academic grants, and recognition within the intellectual community. This rivalry, though initially professional, had become personal over the years, fueled by biting criticism and accumulated tensions. The relationship between Grayson and Alistair came to a head when the latter publicly accused the former of plagiarism in his most recent book. According to Alistair, Grayson had used without credit excerpts from previous research by other authors, including some of his own publications. The accusation generated a scandal that resonated in both academic circles and local media, damaging Grayson's credibility and calling into question his professional ethics. For him, this public criticism was perceived not only as an attack on his work, but also as a direct threat to his career and legacy. In his mind, Alistair had become a dangerous obstacle, someone who had to be neutralized if he was to maintain his prestigious position. When Detective Karen Clark questioned Dr. Grayson about his whereabouts on the night of the murder, he responded with apparent calmness. According to his testimony, he had spent the evening dining at a local restaurant with his wife, who accompanied him until approximately 11 p.m., a time close to the estimated time of Alistair's death. Grayson described the dinner as a routine occasion, a romantic gesture to offset the stress of the past few months. His wife corroborated his account, stating that they had shared a leisurely meal before returning home. However, the establishment lacked security cameras, and there were no records that could confirm his presence, leaving his alibi on fragile and insubstantial ground. Despite his calm appearance during the interrogation, Grayson could not entirely hide a certain tension in his demeanor. His answers, though measured and calculated, seemed rehearsed, as if he had anticipated each question. Some details of his account were vague, omitting specific information about the menu or topics of conversation at dinner. Moreover, his connection to Alistair and the clear motive he had for wishing his disappearance placed him inevitably under suspicion. Alistair's public criticism of his work had not only humiliated him professionally, but also placed him in a vulnerable position within the academic community. Eliminating his rival might have been, from his perspective, a way to regain control over his career and reputation. However, as the investigation progressed, the lack of physical evidence linking Grayson to the crime began to weaken his position as the prime suspect. While his rivalry with Alistair was undeniable, and his alibi presented significant gaps, there was no tangible evidence directly connecting him to the crime scene. The absence of fingerprints, hairs, or other traces at the scene left the door open to other possibilities. To Detective Clark, Grayson remained a relevant piece of the puzzle, but not the centerpiece. His involvement in the case served more as a reminder of how human ambition and professional jealousy can corrupt even those who should be dedicated to the unbiased pursuit of truth. After weeks of investigation, Detective Karen Clark finally found the thread that would unravel the mystery of Alistair Finch's brutal murder. The key discovery was an ancient grimoire, stolen from the victim's private archive, whose yellowed pages contained detailed instructions for dark rituals. Fingerprints found in the book matched those of Margaret Hawthorne. During an intense interrogation, Margaret finally confessed to her crime, revealing that she had killed Alistair to protect her coven. According to her, Alistair planned to publish an article that would expose her secret practices, jeopardizing not only her safety, but also the integrity of a community she had been building for years. The murder was committed following a specific ritual described in the grimoire, a calculated act that combined astrological symbolism, ceremonial objects, and advanced knowledge of ritual magic. Margaret used an athame, a ceremonial knife traditionally associated with esoteric rituals, to carve intricate symbols into Alistair's body. Each mark had a precise meaning. Some represented protection, others vengeance, and still others served as spells of concealment. These symbols were part of a larger pattern that, when analyzed from an astrological perspective, coincided with the position of the planets during the night of the full moon when the crime occurred. It was clear that whoever had performed this act possessed a deep knowledge of ceremonial magic, something that Margaret, as a coven leader, mastered. The position of Alistair's body and the arrangement of the ritual objects also followed a meticulous design. He had been placed in the center of a circle traced with ashes and salt, surrounded by black candles whose melted wax formed specific patterns on the wooden floor. A small cauldron, filled with burnt herbs, was placed near his head, while black feathers and charred bones completed the makeshift altar. It was all part of an astrological pattern designed to channel energy toward a particular purpose. In this case, to protect the killer from suspicion. Margaret firmly believed that the ritual would grant them immunity from investigation, a conviction that reflected both her fanaticism and her desperation to save her coven. The detail that sealed her fate was a small bloodstain found in the grimoire, barely perceptible to the naked eye. Forensic analysis confirmed that it matched Alistair's DNA, irrefutably linking Margaret to the crime. In addition, it was discovered that she had purchased materials identical to those found at the crime scene days before the murder: black candles, a bejeweled athame, and even the same type of incense that saturated the air in the Victorian house. This physical evidence, combined with her confession under pressure, made it clear that Margaret had planned every step with surgical precision. Although the crime initially seemed to be straight out of a dark legend, Detective Karen Clark proved that it was all the work of a calculating mind that manipulated ancient beliefs to commit a modern act of revenge. Margaret was not an impulsive killer. She was someone who had used her knowledge of magic as a tool to justify a premeditated crime. Her obsession with protecting the coven led her to cross a line she should never have crossed, transforming a ritualistic act into a cold, methodical murder. In closing the case, Detective Clark reflected on how beliefs can distort reality. Margaret had not invoked supernatural forces. She had simply exploited the superstition of those who might suspect her. However, her fatal mistake was to underestimate the power of science and logic. Instead of protecting her, the ritual she had taken such care to execute ended up being its own trap, revealing her guilt through details that even she could not control. Margaret Hawthorne was brought to trial, where forensic evidence, including matching fingerprints on the grimoire and Alistair's blood, confirmed her guilt. She admitted committing the crime during a ritual, arguing that she sought to protect the coven, but the jury dismissed her spiritual justifications. She was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case generated intense debate about the influence of beliefs on violent acts. Margaret accepted her fate in silence, while her coven assured that her legacy as a leader would live on among them.